Gamers of the Underworld. Chapters 374 to 396. Chapter 374. It's a conspiracy. It was quiet and late at night. Two crimson moons hung in a corner in the night sky. The time was 3 a.m. In the dark woods, Edward Scissorhand and his large group of bandits went over the city walls stealthily. They met a few crazy construction workers who were building the city walls at such unearthly hours. Did they not sleep? To prevent them from sounding the alarm, the bandits ended their lives with arrows from a distance as they approached Victoria City silently. As they fumbled in the dark, the original 20 minutes of walking on the path took double the time. Along the way, they met some scattered humans, fairies, and elves who were looking for things. If Edward wasn't sure that his plan hadn't been leaked out, he would have suspected a mole on his side. All of these humans, fairies, and elves were silenced. When Edward arrived at Victoria City with his bandit army, he witnessed a chaotic scene. There were moving torches and shouting. "Don't stop me. I want to be the first one to surrender. I want to become a slave. I'll follow veteran hoodlum's footsteps." Nonsense. I'll be the first one to become a slave. Don't be like that. The game is very realistic, so if you surrender and Victoria City and Duchess Lilo are captured, what will we do? Gosh, I'm excited just thinking about it. You defecting trash are for that night with Sherlock Guild will never yield. For Victoria City, buck up. I want a white horse. I'll reserve a white horse. Edward gaped at his bandits. Who was the one who betrayed him? Victoria City was well prepared. If he continued, he would be discovered. The stealth attack plan had failed. Though Edward was indignant, he had no choice but to order a retreat. He waved his hand and whispered, "Convey my orders. The rear will now lead. We're retreating." Before his adjutant had the chance to convey his order, he patted Edward's shoulder and pointed at the ground in front as he said softly, "Boss, something isn't right." Edward turned his head and saw several figures in the woods. They were two elves, two humans, and a short fairy. The five looked at them from afar, and one of them walked closer and said, "Sell us to the slave merchant, or we'll sound the alarm. We aren't threatening you, we'll bring the troops from Victoria City." Edward lifted his hand, and the bandits aimed their bows at them. He then swung down his hand, and the five of them became like hedgehogs. Edward was emotionless as he let his bandits retreat slowly. Just then, he heard someone shout from behind, in the woods ahead. "We were killed by their arrows. In the woods ahead, hurry and charge, quick, inform the rest on the forum. Call back all of the wandering members at the boundary. Don't let our horses escape. Great centenarian, get your horse out and give chase." "What? My horse is extremely valuable. I want to be a slave. Nobody can stop me." Edward gnashed his teeth. Did they not say that there was nobody around at 4 a.m.? Were they not supposed to be at the Sighing Wilderness? How did they know he was coming? Were those people that he killed before the bait to trap him? This was a conspiracy. Even if they lost tens of their members, they wanted Edward to fall into their trap. How terrifying. Edward Scissorhand had thought of all possibilities. They were expecting his attack. The dying man's words were to lure him into attacking at this time. Edward Scissorhand understood why the dying man was full of smiles. This was now apparent. That smile was his conspiracy. Edward didn't know when they were discovered. Seeing the wavering torches, there was no need to remain hidden. He mounted his horse and pulled the reins. Edward tried to lead the way and charge out, but there were too many of them, and they were well prepared. If Edward and his bandits were trapped, then it would be their end. "Quick, we'll attack. We can win. All the slaves and wealth will be ours." Edward kept his wits and shouted. With Edward's order, the bandits charged towards the torches. However, Edward stayed back and grasped the reins of his horse. If the bandits charged out first and acted as his protection, it would be easier for him to escape. That was Edward's plan. As the bandits charged past him, the entire area was filled with torchlight and more shouting. "Boss, we're surrounded." "What? How did we get surrounded?" Edward roared. It was the same situation they had been in 2 months ago. They were surrounded once again. How did the enemy plan all of this? Edward felt immense fear. He could give the excuse that they had only 200 bandits the previous time. But now, they had 2,000 bandits. Despite that, the enemy had anticipated his every move. Who was such a genius? Was it Lancelot? Though Lancelot was an excellent knight, Edward didn't believe that Lancelot would be so intelligent. Who was it? Edward chose a direction with the least activity and shouted to his bandits, "Follow me. There are enemies over there. Let's kill them." Edward shouted, only needing a small portion of his bandits to follow him. He led his small contingent and charged out. As Edward charged out, he saw waves of the enemy dashing out. There were only about 100 of them, so Edward was confident he could deal with them. He charged over, and his scissors ended a fairy's life. The fairy's wings and the body were cut in half. A naked human wielding a large shield charged forward and screamed, "Ah!" Edward controlled his horse and charged head-on. With his speed, if the human wasn't a fool, he would give way because the horse would maim him. The naked shield-bearer didn't care about his life. He held on to his shield and collided with Edward. The human was sent flying, while Edward's horse fell to the ground. Edward lost his balance and fell heavily to the ground. Edward lifted his head. Everything was happening out of his expectations. Edward stood up, and his loyal bandits rallied around him. Before the fallen white horse had a chance to stand up, the bleeding human crawled to it with the intention to caress it. At the last moment, he perished, killed by the impact. "Boss, are you all right?" "I'm all right. Prepare to charge out. We have to get out of here," Edward said to his bandits, though some of them were already charging out. Behind those 100 enemies were tens of other reinforcements. They were heading towards Edward, and the woods were filled with the movement of torches. Edward unsheathed his sword and screamed as he charged forward. His enemies were right before him. Edward swung his weapon skillfully. With his superb combat skills, he was like a wolf among sheep. Each slash created bloodshed, and nobody was his match. The enemies suffered serious casualties, but they weren't scared and had no intention to flee. It wasn't the first time Edward had encountered such a situation, but he felt shocked and intimidated. Why was their willpower so strong? Edward didn't know. He only knew that he had to get out. He decapitated a human and slashed at a person at his side, but his sword was parried by a shield. Behind the shield was a face that Edward found familiar, the leader that he had killed yesterday. The human called Dragonborn. Wait a moment, wasn't he supposed to be dead? Chapter 375. The Rise of Dragonborn. Edward Scissorhand was confused, but with his superior combat skills, he managed to suppress his confusion. He raised both his longsword and scissors and screamed at the charging Dragonborn, "Come and meet your death, you death scammer." Both of their weapons collided. Sparks flew, and the clanking of metal filled the air. Dragonborn knew that he was unable to defeat Edward Scissorhand alone. But it was all right, as the gamers didn't fight bosses alone. "Ah!" Take a spear hit wielded his shield and charged at Edward Scissorhand as he shouted, "I'll curse your mom, and I'll be your dad." Edward was angered by Spearhit's words, unable to take the insult. He decided to use the most brutal way to kill this filthy-mouthed man. Spearhit's handling of the shield was amateurish, and Edward was able to dodge it easily. While Spearhit charged forward, Edward stabbed Spearhit's stomach and lifted him up before smashing him to the ground. Before long, Spearhit became motionless. As for the other gamers, they were being stopped by the bandits. Though there weren't many gamers, more reinforcements were on their way. Edward knew that he shouldn't stay for long. However, he was pestered by Dragonborn, who charged at him again. Though Dragonborn was skilled, he couldn't be compared to the battle-hardened Edward, who could handle Dragonborn easily. In a few rounds of engagement, Dragonborn's arms were amputated. Edward didn't waste precious time and ended Dragonborn's life decisively. Edward didn't hesitate, leading his bandits and charging out of the siege. However, they were surrounded by a dense layer of torches. "Boss, we're surrounded," the bandits shouted in panic. "What? How did we get surrounded?" Edward felt chills on his scalp. He had just handled a group of Victorians when another came to replace them. This must be a trap. When Edward tried to force his way into the crowd, he discovered that the leader of the crowd was a knight with superior equipment, Lancelot. Lancelot wasn't the same as the other gamers. Edward took out his bow and aimed it at Lancelot. The other bandits took out their bows and took aim as well. Lancelot cursed at his despicable opponents and raised his round shield, prepared to be injured. Edward didn't expect a human shield to be formed in front of Lancelot. The arrows landed on the human shield. Edward and the bandits were astonished. What was happening? "Kill them. For our horses." Protect Lancelot. Gosh, if he dies, we won't have a beginner's trainer. Don't kill my Lancelot. The gamers screamed for blood and charged, so Lancelot wasn't able to stand at the forefront. Brothers, let's charge and kill them. Edward shouted furiously as he led the bandits in a charge. A brutal battle ensued. Edward was having a wild time cutting both the armored and naked gamers like vegetables. Lancelot would engage him occasionally, but he would be pushed back by the crowd. The warriors of Victoria City were wary of Lancelot fighting in battles, so they used all ways and means to prevent him from being hurt. As the battle progressed, most of the armored gamers became naked gamers with weapons. In the end, they weren't even using weapons. They were like cannon fodder, standing naked and using their fists to pummel their opponents. It was no different from committing suicide. As the battle dragged on, Edward felt his power depleting. His bandit followers became fewer and fewer, and he couldn't even find a single horse. He remembered seeing hundreds of horses in the beginning, but now there wasn't even a dead horse that could be found on the ground. Those perverted and naked humans, fairies, and elves started shouting. Start inflicting damage on the boss. MT, pull aggro. Long distance damage is limited. Reload the arrows. Leaders of the Hoodlum Yoga Association. The scissors and sword were sold, but you're welcome to reserve the other pieces of armor. The auction is starting from 10 gold coins. 50 gold coins for a straight takeaway. Looking for individual gamers to form a group. The boss is dying. Gosh, the equipment of the boss is being allocated according to the participating groups? The group that inflicts the highest amount of damage will obtain the best rewards? How can poor gamers like us survive? I protest. The group that inflicts the highest amount of damage or deals the fatal blow should be rewarded. If the group that inflicts the highest amount of damage gets the loot, how can individual gamers play the game? We aren't entitled to loot? Yes, if individual gamers don't top up their accounts with money, how can you get stronger? Bro, there's no way to top up in this game. What were these fellows shouting? Were they waiting for me to die? Edward had a very bad feeling about this. Edward swung his longsword and cut down a human. Dawn was breaking, but very few of his enemies were charging at him. Most of them were naked, and they held shields, which they knocked on noisily as they insulted him. Edward was numb to their humiliation. He couldn't help but recall his life as a bandit, how he happily kidnapped and killed people with his comrades. He remembered forcing a prisoner's wife and daughters to his room and torturing them for an entire night. Such happy and memorable times. It was a pity. He was going to die. He was a bandit king with dignity. He knew he couldn't escape, and he had no intention to. Before he died, he had to kill a few more. A naked human wielding a short sword appeared before him. Edward's pupils contracted. The naked human was Dragonborn, whom he had killed twice. He was the leader of the humans. Dragonborn charged at Edward. In his daze, Edward felt the short sword cutting his body. Edward's life flashed in his mind. He nodded as he finally understood that it was his dream. He had a real nightmare. Edward saw the sky spinning while his body collapsed. The severed neck spurted blood as the body fell to the ground. His ears were buzzing as his eyes were filled with darkness. The gamers cheered in the woods, and there were 10 groups who obtained Edward's loot. Even Edward's underwear was allocated as a reward. Though the gamers were suspicious about the combat value of the underwear, many gamers made a high bid. It was the only pair of underwear from the powerful boss, and they were sure it would fetch a high price in the future. It was a correct analysis according to the history of other games. Dragonborn dealt the fatal blow to Edward, so his team obtained the allocation of loot from the system. Congratulations to Dragonborn's team for defeating the boss, Edward Scissorhand. You are randomly allocated Edward's weapon, the Crimson Sword. Please collect your loot from the hamster logistics officer within 2 days. You have to redeem the sword with 500 reputation points. Gosh, we have to spend reputation points? Take a spear, Hid shouted indignantly. It's normal, I'm not surprised anymore. It's good that we don't have to pay with coins. Though, 500 reputation points is equivalent to 5 hours of carrying bricks. Sealhead Ling Chong said. Dragonborn's team consisted of only 40 of his guild members, so the allocation of equipment wasn't troublesome. The loot would be auctioned, and the money would be evenly distributed. Though Dragonborn would like to own the Crimson Sword, he wasn't a rich gamer. There were a few rich gamers who joined Dragonborn's guild based on his reputation. One of them was called Softy, who played the role of a female human. She spent more than 50 gold coins and bought the Crimson Sword. Everyone was jealous of her. All 40 participants obtained more than a gold coin, which would allow them to buy a full set of standard equipment, so they had no complaints. After the auction, Dragonborn didn't expect Softy to run to him and say shyly, "Dragonborn, I'm giving the Crimson Sword to you. Can you teach me close combat skills? How's that?" Chapter 376. Rumors of Dragonborn and Softy. The stronghold of the Pioneer Alliance in Eternal Kingdom. Peasant was placing a large blood-stained piece of armor in a water jar to clean it. It was obtained from Spectre College's troops' training grounds. The previous owner was the final boss, a half-giant skeleton. It was sent to Simba for reforging, but he hammered Peasant's face and looked at the endless queue. Simba, who had dark rings around his eyes, shouted, "Clean it properly first. Are you looking to contaminate the large furnace?" Peasant brought back the armor to clean. Recently, many gamers committed suicide in the large furnace, causing changes to its contents. This had affected the forging process adversely. The game system published daily notices. Gamers are prohibited from jumping into the large furnace. Flouters will be fined. Regardless, there were many gamers who wanted to experience the excitement of jumping into the large furnace. Gosh, did you hear about it? There was an unexpected plot in Victoria City yesterday. Thousands of bandits attacked the city, and they sent them several hundred horses. Peasant spoke with envy and jealousy as he washed the armor. That's nothing to be envious of. They had to depend on the bandits to obtain the horses. If we work hard, we can obtain the darting birds, Not Wearing Pants said as he supported his chin and sat by the side. I don't feel like spending money to buy darting birds, nor do I want to work. I mean, I'm not even getting enough sleep. Sylvanas frowned as she complained. I don't think your gnome face needs any beauty sleep. Sylvanas locked her legs around Burning Chesthair's neck, and there was a sickening crack of the bones. That's nothing to be envious about. We are also going to attack other dungeons. Morgan has declared war on us. Before long, we'll be involved in this plot war. Arthur sharpened his black weapon using a whetstone. Recently, there have been many updates to the plot. We haven't challenged the Ogre Fortress or touched Lilo's hand, yet we're fighting a dungeon war, Peasant said as Not Wearing Pants was frantically trying to rescue Burning Chesthair. Not Wearing Pants said, "Isn't that good? The game content is getting more interesting, and I'm having lots of fun. I'm dying. Burning Chesthair slapped Sylvana's arms, but she didn't relent. Arthur glanced at them and said, "Stop fooling around. If he dies, he'll lose reputation points." "Oh, I know." Sylvanas released Burning Chesthair and sat obediently at one side. "Arthur bro, we have to work hard during the dungeon war. I believe Arthur bro will be the first gamer to ascend the enemy walls." Dragonborn was in the headlines yesterday night. I saw a lot of screenshots of Dragonborn in the forum. His combat skills have improved. The standard of Lancelot seems higher than Moro's. Peasant said indignantly. "Who's Moro's?" Burning Chesthair asked in surprise. "He's our beginner's combat trainer who claimed to be a professional gnome gladiator." Not Wearing Pants said, "Is he that Winterfell security guard?" Peasant asked. "The game settings are bullshit. Dragonborn will never be as awesome as Arthur. My Arthur bro is the best in the world," Sylvanas said furiously. She was trying to show her anger, but it failed with her gnome appearance. "He's really strong." The boss, Edward Scissorhand, had a piece of orange legendary equipment, the Crimson Sword. The attributes are similar to Arthur's sword. Peasant said exaggeratedly. "Gosh, really? Which post is that on the forum? Let's take a look." Not Wearing Pants asked. Peasant said immediately, "The popular post, rumor. Our guild member Softy gifted the legendary Crimson Sword." Just as Peasant finished speaking, Arthur and the other three comrades fell to the ground. They had gone offline. A post was shown on the computer screen. Rumor. Our guild member Softy gifted the legendary Crimson Sword. The creator of the post was anonymous. The post was short, but it looked as though it was written by an abandoned and angry lady. "I am a gamer in Victoria City, and I am sharing a piece of shocking news. This matter starts with a weapon. The picture below is the screenshot of the weapon. Crimson Sword, orange legendary equipment. Damage. 0 to 200. Weight. 10. Durability. 10. Forger. Unknown master. Weapon source. Boss, Edward Scissorhand. Required reputation. Victoria City reputation level 5, basic. The sword came from Edward Scissorhand. The hilt was engraved with a magical crimson stone, so it was named the Crimson Sword. The sword was Edward Scissorhand's favorite weapon, and he used it to defeat numerous opponents. According to legend, the souls of those killed by the Crimson Sword couldn't ascend to heaven. Instead, they were trapped within the precious stone. Basically, it's bullshit. This is a weapon with a damage value of 0 to 200. What kind of a sword is that? Arthur's black legendary weapon has a damage value of 150 at most, and the white standard weapons only have a damage value of 0 to 10. It is indeed a legendary weapon. Any weapon that clashes with the Crimson Sword will be damaged, which is a small matter. As for the white standard weapons, they will be directly broken. Such a weapon, if auctioned in Eternal Kingdom, would fetch millions of renminbi due to the demand of the rich gamers. Perhaps, the record for the first beta auction would also be broken. Since Dragonborn struck the fatal blow on Edward Scissorhand, his team was able to hold the auction for the sword. The final bid price was 55 gold coins, and Softy obtained the loot. Don't ask how I know the details. There were 40 members in the team, and any of them could divulge the details. The most important detail is that Softy gifted the Crimson Sword to Dragonborn. Let us calculate the cost. According to the gold coin pricing in Victoria City, it's about 1 million renminbi. Softy must be a rich gamer to afford 1 million renminbi for a legendary weapon. She didn't bat an eyelid when she gifted the sword to Dragonborn. If it's not true love, I won't believe it. According to rumors, Softy is the daughter of the owner of a publicly listed corporation. Her wealth is comparable to the rich gamer Arthur. If such a rich lady is willing to give an expensive weapon to Dragonborn, they must have known each other already. But this possibility is low. Otherwise, they must have some unknown relationship. I'm dying with jealousy. I don't want to work hard anymore. Just give me a rich Lilo, okay? Okay. I will analyze how Softy falls in love with Dragonborn from my daily observations. Sherlock finished reading the post, which depicted how the writer followed Softy. Only a stalker would do such a thing. There are many rich gamers nowadays, Lord Sherlock. When I was wandering on Earth, they didn't have that much money. Before the advent of computer games, they didn't know the meaning of violence. Bruce said with nostalgia, "Computer games? Violence?" Sherlock was taken aback, as he couldn't relate computer games and violence with one another. What relationship did they have? No, I'm referring to the meme of an American president. Lord Sherlock, don't be bothered by it, Brew explained. I'll not be concerned with the matters in Victoria City. How are the preparations of the gamers of Eternal Kingdom? Sherlock asked as he pushed the computer to the side. Don't worry about the war preparations, Lord Sherlock. I made arrangements for them to do defensive construction and produce minor healing potions, bladder bombs, and new weaponry. As for Yoda and hemp rope technology, they are making great progress in their collaboration since you have invested quite a bit of money. Hemp rope technology is very experienced with robots. With the help of Mana, it's not difficult to produce a prototype, Bruce said. Isn't Lord Sherlock going to collect intelligence on our opponent? I have already obtained intelligence, Sherlock said without emotion. Oh, when was that? Brew asked in surprise right as a flaming letter sprung out from the dungeon core. Sherlock opened the letter and smiled as he said, now. Chapter 377. Changing Race to Orc. Sherlock opened the letter. Respectable Lord Sherlock, we followed your instructions and checked on Morgan's finances for the last 3 months. The dungeon that he bought is a level 3 dungeon close to Winterfell. He didn't recruit any of the citizens from the purchased dungeon. Instead, he dismissed them. He also prepared 100,000 sets of equipment, 10 magic cannons, and various mana scrolls. We were fortunate enough to obtain some equipment and used a magic recorder to secretly take some pictures. Sherlock took out the pictures that depicted a gnome holding a huge helmet that was 1/3 the height of a gnome. Besides the helmet, there was a huge set of armor, a massive shield, and an outrageous pike. However, they were too small for a giant. After all, a giant was 10 meters tall. Sherlock continued reading the letter. According to my initial speculation, the equipment is for ogres. We are still investigating the details. The letter was without any names. A strange symbol flashed before the letter incinerated by itself, leaving no ash. Lord Sherlock, this is getting serious. The 100,000 sets of equipment are for ogres, and the citizens of the dungeon were dismissed. Considering the close relationship between Andrew and the ogres, Morgan may be in cahoots with them as well. Eternal Kingdom only has 5,000 gamers. To fight against 100,000 ogres is a bit difficult, Brew said worriedly. The only way out is to kidnap Nicholas and take control of Winterfell. Using the Winterfell garrison guard is our only hope. Once the garrison guards are all defeated, our gamers can occupy Winterfell. Remember to take over the dungeon core so that I can level up again. The Merchant Alliance won't know what happened to Winterfell, and to stabilize the Northern Underworld, they will arrange for a new dungeon core, and we can hijack the dungeon core once again to form a positive loop. Have you drank too much bloody chrysanthemum tea? Sherlock asked with concern. No, Lord Sherlock, I have no idea how to defeat the 100,000 ogres. Sherlock pondered before saying, if their opponents are orcs, then it's possible. Lord Sherlock's intention is? We commenced the third beta testing some time ago. Due to other matters, we delayed the orc profession. Isn't it a good time to roll it out? Sherlock ordered Brew, assign the mission. All non-goblin gamers with weapon level and reputation level 3 can accept a second profession change mission to become an orc. The details are as follows. Mission title: Profession change, orc. Mission description: you have proven your worth. Lord Sherlock will allow you to break through by becoming an orc. Mission objective: work hard for 0.24 of an hour and submit 0.10 units of materials. Mission reward: you will become an orc. All of the Houndhead men and gnomes received this mission. The mission objective was negligible compared to the previous ones. The gamers were only required to work for 24 hours and submit spider legs and spider meat. They could easily obtain the materials from the marshes of the Marsh Inkspewers, the Spider's Lair, the Sighing Wilderness, and even outside the Winterfell gates. The most tedious item was the 24 hours of carrying bricks. However, for the hard-working gamers, it was nothing. It was only a single day. Work for it. 24 hours later. Don't stop me, I can continue working. Not wearing pants was feeling dizzy. Even though he was in a game, he could feel the drowsiness. It was rare for him to work 24 hours carrying bricks. Not wearing pants noticed that he had completed the mission in his mission panel, so he hurried over to the Dungeon Lord main hall. Eggface sat at a table in front of the entrance. There was a long queue of about 100 gamers. Clearly, not wearing pants wasn't the first one to complete his orc mission. Behind him, the queue was lengthening. When it was Not Wearing Pants' turn, Eggface asked without lifting his head, name. Not Wearing Pants. This name sounds familiar, Eggface muttered to himself before taking out a form. Copy this. There is a water tub for you to drown. There is also a rope there for you to hang. Lastly, there is a sword for you to cut your throat. I suggest hanging as it's cleaner. Not Wearing Pants was dumbstruck. What's there to exclaim about? Next, Eggface said as he pushed Not Wearing Pants to the side. While the gamers were queuing up for an orc change, Brew was expressing his doubts to Sherlock. Lord Sherlock, it's time for us to fortify our dungeon. Why are you making it hard for the gnomes and Houndhead men to change professions? Even if they become orcs, they will work hard to carry bricks. No, I didn't create the tedious mission and the lengthy procedures such as copying the 100 rules of proper behavior of an underworld citizen, because I want them to do more work. It's because, Sherlock rubbed his temple. In front of him was a large cup of bloody chrysanthemum tea. With that many orc profession switches, my mental energy is diminishing rapidly, making me feel tired and weak. If I can prevent that, I'll do so. It's tough on you, Lord Sherlock. I sympathize with your predicament. Sherlock asked, have you finished the calculation? How many gamers can become orcs? Lord Sherlock, there are 3,256 gamers who received the mission. Out of those, 1,000 gamers became Houndhead men and gnomes recently. A lot of gamers also ignored this orc mission because the Houndhead man has a greater mana affinity, and they prefer the greater mana capacity of a Houndhead man to the beefy orc. Sherlock felt disgusted as he said, Tisk, do the gamers like mana so much? It seems like it. Let's put this aside. Is the large furnace mission ready? Brew replied, all of the blacksmiths are at level 2. Those who can do forging have received the blacksmith profession mission. In the following days, they will only receive forging daily missions. To increase their motivation towards forging, I followed your instructions to reduce the prices of the raw materials by half. On top of that, using the large furnace doesn't require a fee. New orc equipment with green excellent quality will be forged by the gamers. Brew said, for their services, there will be a fixed charge of 50 to 100 bronze coins according to the raw materials used and the quality of equipment. Simba will still be in charge of forging blue superior and better quality equipment. Also, 2 pieces of legendary equipment will be combined into one with compensation to solve the issue of the orc's size difference. Very good. The equipment problem has to be resolved within 3 days. This mission will take precedence over the daily missions, Sherlock ordered. I understand, Lord Sherlock. A letter came out from the Dungeon Corps. Devil Management Committee number 2,589,652 document, addressed to Lord Sherlock. Seems like war is starting. Sherlock smiled as he picked up the document. Yoda woke up early. He didn't sleep well last night because the entire dungeon was busy working through the night. Who knew why they were working so hard? Yoda cleaned himself, put on his clothes, ate his clay breakfast, and opened his door. Lo and behold, why were there so many orcs? Chapter 378, War Preparation. Within one night, almost half of the gamers became orcs. Though the orcs had fresh faces, Yoda felt like he knew them. They said familiar things. Hey, have you finished your daily mission? If not, let's do it together. Require a leader for Spectre College, Training Grounds. The other 4 members are ready. We were booked before, and there is no refund. Winterfell Cafe is recruiting employees. Aren't you applying? 10 magic stones per month. I'm not going. I have a blacksmithing daily mission with generous rewards. A large number of gamers have become orcs, and they require the reforging of their equipment. I have to make use of the chance to make more money. Gosh, if only I had learned blacksmithing. I'm regretting it now. There are a few tall trees left in the forest. Extremely high difficulty. Looking for mathematics research students. Hurry, only limited places left. Did you know that Sylvanas killed a team member with an arrow yesterday? What? Impossible. Isn't Sylvanas archery the best in the world? Selling gold coins from your trusted brand, Birthdate. Make sure you do business with Birthdate. The orcs weren't only prevalent in the streets of Eternal Kingdom, the situation was the same elsewhere. There were orcs queuing up outside the blacksmith shop. There were orcs queuing up at the Sacred Light Worshipping Chapel to become Sacred Knights. There were also orcs at the Teleport Portal Main Hall, Living Quarters, Commercial Area, Industrial Area, and Yoda's Mana Engineering Workshop. Overnight, there were an additional 1,000 orcs. It was a shock to the NPCs. Brainiac also noticed this phenomenon. He wanted to ask, but he was bound by Sherlock's contract, so he couldn't ask unless Sherlock voluntarily informed him. However, this didn't mean that he couldn't do research. He had to determine if these orcs were the same as the previous gnomes, houndhead men, and goblins and whether they could be revived. The most direct method was to conduct a physical examination. The gamers were cooperative with Brainiac's experiments, and they started queuing up outside the Lish's burial hall. The appearance of orcs created a wave of excitement, but the gamers didn't feel strange about it. Everyone proceeded with their chores. For example, Hemp Rope Technology continued with his goal and made final adjustments to the prototype robot. Hemp Rope Technology knew that the prototype robot depended on rune mana formations and the mana core arcane technology for propulsion, and he was extremely interested in researching the arcane technology. To Hemp Rope Technology, all things had rules, and everything could be researched. If he couldn't understand, that was quantum mechanics. Wrong, it was mana. Hemp Rope Technology looked down on mana initially. Compared to science, mana was just a special effect created using mathematics. After all, the entire world was a game. However, he and Yoda went deep into research of the prototype robot, and he came to understand the mechanics of the airship and the basics of mana. That was when Hemp Rope Technology discovered that it wasn't so simple. Mana could create propulsion even though it couldn't be seen. In reality, there was a similar dark matter. After understanding mana, Hemp Rope Technology discovered the governing laws. Even if he explained it for days and nights, he couldn't finish all of the detailed information. Considering the ultra-realistic rules in the game, hemp rope technology was contemplating the possibility of mana being one of the governing laws. Perhaps contemporary scientists hadn't discovered it. That or nobody published their research on it. The game capsule, which allowed 100% simulation of reality, was a mana arcane technology. It was possible that such mana arcane technology had been discovered and that the game producers implemented the technology into the game. This idea appeared many times in hemp rope technology's mind. However, research wasn't done in 1 or 2 days. Moreover, he didn't have a good research entry point. To discover science principles in mana was strange. But hemp rope technology was still tempted. While constructing and understanding the prototype robot, he learned more about mana. He managed to duplicate a mana rune. After infusing it with mana, he was able to create a large amount of energy. However, his body was unable to withstand the strong power and mana energy, so he had to commit suicide and change to a new body. After this experiment, hemp rope technology discovered many new weapons. The new discoveries required voluntary laboratory rats. Besides using himself, he chose a few gamers to conduct experiments on. Arthur was one of the volunteers for hemp rope technology's new weapons. This rune allows an increase in power. Goblins are unable to withstand the power, but it may work for an orc. Hemp rope technology looked at the orc, Arthur, and his arms, which had new rune mana formations drawn on them. Focus your attention on the rune mana formations and infuse them with your mana. Hemp rope technology guided Arthur in feeling and getting used to the mana rune formations. Arthur infused some mana into his right arm, and he felt a power that he hadn't experienced before. His muscles were bulging from the effect of mana, and combined with the orc's muscular body, Arthur looked menacing. Arthur grabbed a rope that was attached to a huge rock. He raised the rope and lifted the rock single-handedly. It was all thanks to the rune mana formations, as Arthur was very sure that he couldn't achieve such a feat using his personal strength. The duration of the burst of power was less than a few seconds. Arthur felt the power dissipating, and he placed the rock down. After that, he was unable to control his shaking arm. This is normal. After exerting such tremendous power, it's a miracle that your muscles weren't destroyed, hemp rope technology said as he looked at Arthur. Chapter 379. Eve of the Dungeon War. If the materials for drawing these rune mana formations were changed to mana materials, the effect would be even greater. I suspect the power will be what the orc can bear. After all, the power that you experienced is too much for a goblin or gnome to bear. Hemp rope technology noticed that the rune mana formations were vanishing from Arthur's body. He said, according to my research, different portions of the rune mana formation will affect the duration and effect. I controlled the effect, but I'm still figuring out the duration. I believe that I will have a breakthrough soon. Why don't you copy the rune mana formations on the prototype robot? Arthur moved his numb arm, which felt as though an electric current had passed through it. He could still feel his arm, though. This was the side effect of using the rune mana formation. The propulsion of the prototype robot comes from the mana core after the rune mana formation connects with the mana core via the transmission of mana to control the robot components. Are you able to have a mana core inside of you? Wait, just like Iron Man. If I install a mana core where your heart is, will it work? This will require the Underworld biological expert. If we use a device for scanning objects to scan the rune mana formation, then use the computer for data analysis. Hemp rope technology muttered to himself. Arthur interrupted him and said, I'll invest in this research. I would like you to invest. But unfortunately, Sherlock has invested in this research, hemp rope technology said with a sense of regret. Sherlock? That Sherlock? Are you referring to the NPC Sherlock? Don't look at me like that, I'm not joking. If you don't believe me, go to the Dungeon Lord main hall and ask. I don't understand why the NPC invested in my research. Hemp rope technology felt that it was strange and said, Sherlock provided all of the raw materials and signed a research agreement with me. All the fruits of my research belong to him, while I will obtain his full support and a set of legendary equipment. Arthur was speechless. Was that the power of knowledge? Hemp rope technology's new inventions consisted of the almost completed prototype robot, the rune mana formations that were transcribed on organic bodies, and new weapons that made use of mana and steam technology. For example, a magic wand that could fire magic missiles, a bow equipped with an aiming scope, and a simple steam-operated slingshot. These new weapons were still in the transition process from the experimental laboratory to the mass production stage. To sell these new weapons, Hemp Rope Technology bought a prime shop in the commerce area. It wasn't owned by any guilds. Instead, he had sole proprietorship. He had even thought of the name, Future Technology Private Limited. Arthur walked out of the Mana Engineering Project Hall, where Not Wearing Pants and Sylvanas were bickering while waiting for him. Both of them walked towards Arthur, and Sylvanas was very happy and shouted in her shrill voice, "Arthur bro. I asked around and found out that you were at the Mana Engineering Project Hall. I waited for you for a long time. Wah, you are a guy disguised as a girl. You're a rich gamer too, so can you stop your endearing behavior?" Not Wearing Pants teased Sylvanas mercilessly. "I don't care what you think, and I'll say whatever I like." Sylvanas stood akimbo and shouted in frustration. Then she became gentle as she said to Arthur, "Arthur bro, we agreed to challenge the 15-member instance dungeon after becoming orcs. Did you forget about it, Arthur bro?" "Yes, we're all waiting for you. Let's make haste," Not Wearing Pants said. Arthur nodded. As he was about to leave with them, a public notice appeared before them. "The dungeon war will commence in 3 days' time. You have been automatically assigned the Dungeon War Chain missions." It was followed by a new mission. Mission title: Eve of the Dungeon War. Mission description: the evil Andrew was defeated by Eternal Kingdom, but his malevolent brother, Morgan, wants to avenge Andrew's defeat and is leading his army to destroy Eternal Kingdom. The Devil Management Committee has approved of the dungeon war, so the battle is inevitable. The war is about to start. But do not fear, warriors. You may not be the most powerful, but you possess indomitable willpower. You will help Eternal Kingdom tide through this crisis. Mission objective: we have to prepare for war. Polish your weapons and armor, and install bows and arrows at the dungeon walls. The enemy is powerful, and we must depend on our limited advantages to resist their attacks. Arrow production: 0-100ths. Mission reward: during the dungeon war, all gamers will gain reputation points at a slow rate. Mission penalty: closure of the game. Why is the mission penalty so severe? Not Wearing Pants started complaining, saying, "Have you seen such willful game officials? Get used to it. It has always been like this." Sylvanas waved her hand indifferently. She then said, "What's your mission?" "I'm carrying Diamond Seam ore. I'm producing arrows," Not Wearing Pants answered. Arthur said, "I'm training to operate the prototype robot." A horse carriage carrying a few guards passed by a muddy road. They were looking at a metal cage that held a deformed and ugly human. Above his head were the words, "Hoodlum," with Hoodlum Yoga Association below his name. The guards didn't know and weren't bothered by the green symbols. The carriage came to a grand castle, and a castle guard opened the gate by pressing a button. The huge castle gate lifted with the deafening sound of steam engines. "Hi, sending a new toy again?" The gate guard and the guards on the horse carriage knew each other well, so he lifted his hand and joked with his friends. "I can guarantee that the toy is different this time," a guard on the horse carriage said with a strange expression as he looked at Hoodlum. What's different? I'm unable to watch the show today since I'm on shift. Can you tell me?" The gate guard asked as he followed the horse carriage for a while, but his friend didn't tell him. His friend merely smiled and said, "Give me an Empire gold coin, and I'll tell you." "I'll only charge 50 silver coins," said another. The gate guard waved his hand and stopped following, shouting, "As you wish. Anyway, the prisoner is bound to die, which means you must be trying to fool me. After all, you said it was different last time, and the prisoner was dead within 10 minutes. It's not fun." The gate guard then returned to his post. The guards on the carriage laughed, but they discovered Hoodlum glaring at them and stopped laughing. From Hoodlum's gaze, it was as though the guards were the prisoners, and they were like animals. He was such a terrifying human. The guards felt fearful. "Wait, why didn't you answer the gate guard's question?" "I don't mind your compliments," Hoodlum said as he looked at them. The guards didn't answer Hoodlum's question. It wasn't the first time Hoodlum asked such a brainless and strange question. The carriage stopped outside a building, and the guards disembarked and opened the cage. They then led the heavily cuffed Hoodlum out of the cage and down the carriage. A man with a small black hat came by. He looked nervous as he said, "The Duke of York is very unhappy. You were supposed to bring the man here a month ago." "Apologies, Pastor. Our master gave him some training sessions, and I can guarantee that the training sessions were necessary. The Duke of York will be pleased, a guard said in trepidation. I hope it's as you've said. Otherwise, your master won't be able to come to the Duke of York's castle ever again. The pastor opened the huge door behind him, then said, "Follow me. The guests have waited for a long time." The guards looked at each other as they pushed Hoodlum into the building. The entrance hall of the building was huge. There was a spiraling staircase going up, but they took the spiraling staircase that went down. The pastor prayed in front of a statue, then pressed a secret mechanism, which caused the statue to move. A tunnel was revealed underneath the statue. Hoodlum was quickly pushed into the secret tunnel. The journey was long. With passing time, the whispering of people became clearer. Hoodlum was placed in the middle of a round arena, and a spotlight shone on his body. Ladies and gentlemen, a tall figure stood in front of a high platform and held a microphone-looking object as he shouted loudly, "Welcome to tonight's secret meeting." Chapter 380. Nicholas's Document. Masked men and women were on the viewing platforms surrounding the round arena. They wore luxurious costumes and looked like nobles. The host shouted, "We have enough of the hypocritical kindness. The Grand Priest told us to love each other, study, and respect knowledge, but our hearts tell us otherwise. We don't need all of that. We want violence, stimulation. You will get that at our secret meeting." The crowd cheered wildly. Hoodlum wanted to ask if there were any rewards after going through a month of hardship, but nobody could understand what he was saying. The metal door in front of Hoodlum lifted gradually, and a 4-meter-tall Tauren wielding a huge axe walked out. He had muscles that inspired fear. He looked powerful, but Hoodlum wasn't fearful. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to watch the performance. The stage of the host dimmed down, while more lights focused on the round arena. Following this, a weapon and a shield were thrown down from the viewing platform. They were for Hoodlum. Hoodlum picked up his weapon and shield and looked at the charging Tauren-like monster, which wasn't the Tauren that appeared on the forum. It was more like an uncivilized evil creature. A huge axe descended upon Hoodlum, and he dodged while he slashed with lightning speed at the monster's kneecap. The monster felt pain and bent its knees. Hoodlum took the chance and leapt up while stepping on the monster's kneecap. The Tauren's axe was lifted up, but Hoodlum had no intention to dodge as he knew there was only a single chance. Hoodlum raised his short sword and stabbed at the monster's throat, while the axe landed behind his skull. Hoodlum rolled on the ground as the Tauren monster covered its throat and gasped for air. The monster struggled and collapsed to the ground, convulsing until it died. Ecstatic cheering erupted in the hall. Hoodlum stood up and enjoyed the gazes of the spectators, then lifted both of his hands and gestured for them to cheer louder. "Incredible! This slave used a single blow to defeat our monster. I'm in awe. The next monster won't be easy to deal with. Let me release." "Wait, what's he doing? Why is he lying on the ground?" Hoodlum fell to the ground and remained motionless. He shut his eyes and looked like he was sleeping. Some guards walked in and gave Hoodlum a few slaps, shouting into his ears. But it was all in vain. There was no reaction. A guard stabbed Hoodlum's palm, but he remained motionless. The guard was about to cause more harm, but his comrade stopped him and pointed to the viewing platform. A masked man lifted his hand to stop them and whispered to his attendant, who nodded. The attendant then approached the host, who said, "This gladiator has used up all of his energy and needs a rest. Let's watch the next gladiator fight." Despite Hoodlum being on the ground, the spectators were still ecstatic. The person on the viewing platform who gave the orders to the guards was the owner of the castle, the Duke of York. Beside him was a fat man, the slave merchant who bought Hoodlum from Edward. He didn't know that his old friend Edward had perished. Though Edward and the Duke of York were enemies, the slave merchant wasn't involved in their dispute. Whether they were nobles or bandits, they required the services of this dark trader. "Grand Duke, as I said in the letter, this slave isn't normal. His willpower is so strong that the body doesn't belong to him. He's not afraid of pain or death and is very diligent. I only trained him for around a month, but he mastered most of the combat techniques. The strange thing is that he will faint at any time and won't respond to any stimuli. This is the only disadvantage. If we can negotiate with him on the timing, he will bring customers and enormous wealth to the secret meeting. Believe me, he's the most unique gladiator that I have ever seen. You've done well. He's indeed different from the rest. That being said, I'll reward you handsomely. What about those two that you took a fancy to? They can wash clothes and work diligently in the household. Bring them back." The masked Duke of York waved his hand and said, "Thank you, Duke of York." The fat man smiled happily and left with the attendant. As for the Duke of York, he continued watching the gladiator fight in the arena. There were a few guests in Eternal Kingdom. They were 3 hamsters and the cute Miss Lilo, who was wearing a tutu skirt. Who knew why the leader of Victoria City came to Eternal Kingdom as a guest? The gamers of Eternal Kingdom were unable to attack Lilo, and Sherlock even came out to welcome her. Many gamers queued up and waited for the customer service Black Dragon to report for work. They were going to complain about this bug, which they were unhappy about. What was the use of an enemy faction leader if she couldn't be attacked? Sherlock wasn't bothered by the gamers and was hosting Lilo. Eggface was putting away his mouse, keyboard, and earphones since he was starting work soon. "I heard that the Devil Management Committee approved the dungeon war between Morgan and you. All of our previous classmates were discussing this. Doesn't Morgan know that we're attacking the Heavenly Kingdom? Why did he do this?" Lilo asked as she held her cup of green tea and frowned. There will always be strange creatures in this world who think that they are winning. Then they will attack complacently. Sherlock wasn't panicking. It was as though he wasn't involved in the dungeon war. "I don't quite understand you." Lilo frowned. "Don't worry. If I can't win this war, then Eternal Kingdom can forget about attacking the Heavenly Kingdom." "Don't you think so?" Lilo nodded. "I noticed strange things in the Mana Engineering Project Hall." "What is that tall statue?" Lilo asked as she gestured with her hand. "That isn't a statue, it's a prototype robot." Sherlock pondered and said, "It's a combat mecha created from rune mana and metal. According to the design, a creature can pilot the robot from the cockpit by infusing mana. It will allow a goblin to have the power of a supergiant. Obtaining a small bit of power by creating a large object, isn't this a bit wasteful in terms of materials?" Lilo frowned and asked. "No, I think it's meaningful," said Sherlock. "If we can mass-produce these combat mechas in the future, then creatures without formal training can possess the superpower of a giant. This will improve our combat power by leaps and bounds. I'm not sure how they can be of value against the Angel Army, but since Sherlock thinks so, I'll not probe further." Lilo said, "I don't think you'll want me to ignore the citizens of Victoria City. What mission do we have? Though I don't fancy the humans, fairies, and elves, they are rather diligent. There are missions for them to fulfill. I'll discuss it with you in detail." Sherlock took out a map and pointed to a spot as he said, "According to my intelligence, Morgan has 100,000 ogres. It could be a bluff, but he will have a sizable army. Eternal Kingdom won't be conquered, but to prevent unnecessary casualties and the feeling of losing a large amount of mana, I have a plan." In the Winterfell Dungeon Lord's office. "Dungeon Lord, we have received notification from the Devil Management Committee. All activities, especially those outside our territory, have to be stopped since the dungeon war is about to break out." A sludge monster informed Nicholas, who was sitting behind a table. "I got it." Nicholas nodded. He wore a grave expression as he examined a document on the table. It was related to Eternal Kingdom. Chapter 381. Victoria City's War Preparation. Nicholas's document came from the Merchant Alliance. The content was simple, saying to keep Winterfell neutral and not to participate in the war between Morgan and Sherlock. Nicholas was prepared. After much consideration, he decided to side with Sherlock, who exhibited shocking potential and incredible influence. Even if someone told him that Lucifer was Sherlock's father, he wouldn't be surprised. But he couldn't go against the Merchant Alliance, especially when it concerned Winterfell. Though he was the Dungeon Lord, he couldn't override the Merchant Alliance's authority. After much consideration, Nicholas decided to use his limited ways to help Sherlock in Eternal Kingdom. He called for his assistant, the sludge monster butler. Sherlock was reading Nicholas's letter in the Dungeon Lord main hall. Nicholas said that he would be helping Sherlock in his personal capacity. He decided to sell all of his property to build a mercenary army and would soon arrive at Eternal Kingdom to help with the defenses. After some simple calculations, it became clear that it wasn't feasible. The war would begin in 3 days, while it would take Nicholas 3 months to sell his property and organize an army. Sherlock wrote a letter that said, "I don't need soldiers or money. Just support me with equipment." Sherlock sent a list of equipment that included bows and arrows and equipment for Houndhead men and orcs. There was a greater demand for orc equipment. As for goblins, Sherlock didn't request any equipment for them since the requirement was low. Very few goblins wanted to spend money on quality equipment, as they preferred to become gnomes or Houndhead men before improving their equipment. A goblin had difficulty dealing with an underground spider, while a well-equipped gnome with the required weapon level could defeat a spider without being injured. A 15-member orc team equipped with a generous amount of minor healing potions was able to consistently conquer the Spectre College, Troops Training Ground, Instance Dungeon. The advent of the orc race improved the combat power of the gamers by leaps and bounds. Nicholas didn't reject Sherlock's suggestion, as he had strong reasons. Nicholas made immediate arrangements to send the equipment to Eternal Kingdom by the next day. Sherlock also promised that he would always support Nicholas as the Dungeon Lord, the Area Manager, the General Manager, and the CEO of the Merchant Alliance. He also said that he would help him marry a rich woman and reach the pinnacle of his life. Nicholas sent a letter of gratitude. Meanwhile, Sherlock continued to deal with the affairs of the impending war. The gamers of Victoria City were, as usual, busy working. They completed their daily mission the moment they came online. The daily mission was similar to the one in Eternal Kingdom, which was to cut trees, carry bricks, process the wood, produce equipment, clean areas, and construct houses and walls. Then the gamers would enter the spider's lair to hunt for raw materials. They would also go to the Sighing Wilderness to hunt for more materials and play PvP. The battlefield gameplay in Eternal Kingdom wasn't available to the gamers of Victoria City. Though the Ogre Fortress was officially opened, the reputation levels of the Victorian gamers hadn't reached the requirement, so they were unable to enter. The gameplay options of the Victorian gamers were less than those of the Eternal Kingdom gamers, but they didn't complain. They had many things to do in this game. Victoria City was just developing, so construction and finding materials took up a huge chunk of the game's time. For equipment improvement, the gamers had to exchange their game coins and reputation points at the Hamster Logistics Officer's location. The quality of the equipment in Victoria City was comparable to Eternal Kingdom. Victoria City also suffered bandit attacks occasionally, which made it exciting and profitable for the gamers. The fact that they obtained hundreds of horses made the gamers ecstatic, and all trades derived from the horses boomed. The gamers engaged in the resale of horses, the construction of stables, the production and sale of horse feed, the repairing of horseshoes, and even horse massage and health. However, after Lilo returned from Eternal Kingdom, she declared Victoria City to be in a state of war, and the gamers of Victoria City received a new mission. She ordered the gamers to stockpile war materials and transport war machinery. Yes, it was transportation. Victoria City wasn't able to produce things such as bows, crossbows, and ballistas. They were provided by Eternal Kingdom. The gamers of Eternal Kingdom transported these items to the road intersection, and the gamers of Victoria City transported them back to their city. It was a regulated loop. After the bandits were defeated and their leader Edward Scissorhand was killed by Dragonborn, there were no more organized bandits. Occasionally, there were a few scattered bandits who had nowhere else to go. However, they were gradually killed by the gamers once they started foraging in the forests. The gamers of Victoria City had an additional task, which was to learn how to use bows and crossbows from the elf, Untouchable. Unlike Eternal Kingdom, Victoria City had an NPC who could methodically teach one how to use long-distance weapons. Dragonborn wasn't interested in long-distance weaponry, but it was one of the daily missions. Fortunately, the prices of bows and crossbows fell recently, such that every gamer was able to afford them. The falling prices weren't due to market forces. Lilo ordered the prices slashed so that the gamers could increase their long-distance combat power to prepare for the coming battles. As a result, long-distance weaponry was as cheap as vegetables, and the gamers could buy them after doing a few simple missions. The accidental casualty rate of Victorian gamers increased dramatically, as many of the gamers were killed by their own archers. It was a necessary pain of long-distance combat. Previously, Eternal Kingdom went through the same calamity. Dragonborn was curious. Who are we fighting against in this war that we're preparing for? Of course, it's Eternal Kingdom. Take a Spearhead adjusted his crossbow and said, think about it. Eternal Kingdom is fighting in a dungeon war. According to the background story, we are enemies. How can we miss this chance to backstab Eternal Kingdom? What you've said makes sense. However, the game doesn't have such a far-sighted plot. Though we are enemies with Eternal Kingdom, both factions consist of gamers. If a faction is fighting against evil and the other faction takes advantage, the gamers will cause an uproar. This will only happen if the game producers are silly. Sealhead Ling Chong was dumbfounded. He looked at both of his comrades. Gosh, the game producers have always been silly. Are we really attacking Eternal Kingdom? Chapter 382, Fourth Watch. Dragonborn didn't know if they would attack Eternal Kingdom. Sherlock and Lilo didn't say anything, and even the official website didn't have any information. Nobody knew what role they would play in the dungeon war. The only thing they knew was that when Eternal Kingdom started fighting, the gamers of Victoria City wouldn't be idling. When the gamers of Victoria City began to prepare for war, the gamers of Eternal Kingdom took notice. Before Lilo announced the preparation for war, the gamers had already disseminated the information on the discussion forum. Verbal spats occurred on the discussion forum, the keyboard warriors defending their own factions. The gamers of Eternal Kingdom accused the Victorians of being despicable by taking advantage of their predicament. At the same time, the Victorians accused the gamers of Eternal Kingdom of bullying new gamers. This kind of verbal spat was inevitable. While the gamers were bickering, the 3 days of war preparation slipped by. In a gray valley, ogres gathered. Occasionally, some of the ogres would break out into fights and draw their weapons. Fortunately, the ogres at the side would step in and stop the bickering. Countless ogres had assembled here, and they only obeyed one superior devil, Morgan. A thin ogre stood on a high vantage point and blew a horn with great effort. The ogres below cheered as a wyvern shrieked above their heads. From the wyvern's view, it looked like a dense mass of crawling ants. Morgan stood on high ground that overlooked the ogre army in the valley, observing the ogres marching out of the valley. Morgan was excited by the ogre army. Who would have thought that he would be able to control these insane and brutal ogres? His silly brother also made use of the ogres, but he only allied with the leader of a single tribe. They were just making use of each other. It was different in his case. These ogres didn't have any tribal leaders, as he was their leader. Tens of thousands of ogres were under his command, controlled using a method depicted in Michelangelo's Lost Book. Using Michelangelo's method, he controlled the ogres. Morgan's goal wasn't just a book. He wanted to rob Michelangelo of all his wealth. Attacking Eternal Kingdom and capturing Sherlock alive was the first step of his ambition. As for consideration of defeat? No. He didn't even think about it. How could he lose with tens of thousands of ogres? Moreover, he had an ace in the hole, a trump card for his last strike. Morgan laughed sinisterly as he imagined defeating Sherlock and robbing him of Michelangelo's relic. He would then spend some time to master the great devil's power and gain the recognition of his dad before defeating his stupid elder brother. He would become the first successor to Eternal Fire. Then, Morgan had filled his mind with a fabulous storyline. The storyline would definitely materialize. On the 4th day after receiving the Devil Management Committee's notification of war, Sherlock was wearing his heroic battle cloak and giving the gamers a battle speech to motivate them to kill valiantly. They would be fearless even if they had to sacrifice their lives. He deployed the gamers to their defensive posts and conducted a last-minute check to ensure there were no deficiencies. They waited for a whole day, but nobody came. At night, a group of a few hundred reporters visited the dungeon, each of them having a reporter pass. Most of them were from the Merchant Alliance's Winterfell branch, while the rest were from other dungeons. They wanted to be battlefield reporters. Everyone was concerned about the dungeon war, which ended 100 years of peace. Sherlock didn't have a good impression of the reporters. They loved to commission advertisements in their newspapers, which reduced the volume of news. Sherlock didn't spend any money on newspapers before. In addition, the reporters liked to write nonsense. If he socialized with them, he would fall into their language traps if he wasn't careful. Sherlock was about to drive them away when he saw the reporters paying magic stones to interview Arthur. Sherlock assigned Eggface an important mission. All reporters, please come over here for registration. Every reporter will pay 10 magic stones for an admission pass into the dungeon. Reporters without a pass will be denied entry. Eggface stood at the dungeon entrance and shouted at the reporters. Besides the admission fees, Sherlock prepared a price list for interviews. Interviewing Simba, 5 magic stones. Interviewing Mufasa, 5 magic stones. Interviewing Moros, 5 magic stones. Every employee was given an interview price tag, including Sherlock himself. Sherlock's interview price was much higher than the rest. It was 40 magic stones. By paying 40 magic stones, a reporter could ask Sherlock any questions, and he would guarantee an answer. The paying reporters queued up to interview Sherlock, and the questions were very focused. For example, why did Sherlock and Morgan fight? When did Lord Sherlock recruit so many gnomes, goblins, and orcs? We checked the employment records at the labor union. Besides Brainiac's records, there were no employee records under Eternal Kingdom. Why is that? Sherlock's answer was simple. I don't know. Apologies. This regards personal privacy, and other similar replies. After interviewing the people of Eternal Kingdom, the reporters had no intention of leaving. They set up tents and cooking utensils to prepare meals. It seemed like the reporters were going to camp there for some time. They wanted to witness the first war after 100 years of peace. Chapter 383, News Conference. Patrick Starr was a gnome reporter who was highly professional. After graduation, he started working at the Winterfell news agency and began his legendary career. Ever since he started working, he conducted the interviews and wrote most of Winterfell's legendary news. Like the cases of the 7th District's vagabond who urinated and defecated indiscriminately, an elder who secretly studied mathematical books, the farting of the Winterfell dungeon lord during a meeting, and a family having a healthy gnome baby. He wrote all of these popular news articles. He was able to cover all pieces of news except for those that didn't exist. Eternal Kingdom had been a dungeon of interest lately, so it attracted the attention of many news reporters. This was especially so since the dungeon was involved in a dungeon war, something that hadn't occurred for thousands of years. Even then, the previous dungeon war was a joke created by 2 dungeon lords, so there were no casualties. After the advent of the Devil Management Committee, the primordial era of dungeon wars came to an end. Though the appearance of Michelangelo disrupted peace and caused the battle between the underworld and surface world, it was only for a short while, and peace was quickly restored. The Devil Management Committee had agreed to the current dungeon war, so there was no reason for Patrick Starr not to cover this important event. It was the 4th day since he took the dedicated Beetleman Express line to Eternal Kingdom. He was fortunate to take the earliest trip. The Beetleman was filled with 200 to 300 news workers. The first person to receive him at Eternal Kingdom was the Black Dragon Tollkeeper. That was correct, it was a black dragon. Though the young black dragon was only a few years old, the dominant aura of the dragon made Patrick Starr's legs tremble. Even advanced creatures such as vampires would feel the same way. Patrick Starr was very sure of that. Eternal Kingdom is private property. You'll need an admission pass for a reporter. 10 magic stones. The black dragon repeated those words like a robot to all passing reporters, looking down the whole time. If any reporter approached him to ask questions, the black dragon would lift up his head and raise a brow. Then, he would slap the signboard at the side and make paw, paw, paw sounds before saying, ha? Do you have a problem? Isn't it clearly written? 10 magic stones for an admission pass. Additional charges for each interviewee. You'll pay for anyone that you're interviewing. I'm here to collect the magic stones. Seeing the fierce black dragon, even if the reporters would like to uphold freedom of the press, they were greatly intimidated. Patrick Starr didn't have any problems. Though 10 magic stones was a bit expensive, considering the prestige and power of Eternal Kingdom, it was natural for the dungeon to keep out poor and incapable news workers. Would Lord Sherlock be greedy for money? No, no, no. It was impossible. Lord Sherlock was able to recruit his citizens easily. Within half a year, he fought with both the Ancient God's army and Samael to save Winterfell, incurring tens of thousands of casualties. However, he didn't bat an eyelid or become flustered. Not to mention, the death compensation was at least a few million magic stones. How could Lord Sherlock be poor? Impossible. That was what Patrick Starr believed. Patrick Starr was well prepared for the interviews. He was interviewing the citizens of Eternal Kingdom, especially the gnome, Arthur, who obtained the Black Rider status. As he was about to pay for the interview, the Black Dragon said, "Gnome? Arthur is an orc now. He has changed professions. Please wait while I call him." "Oh, isn't Arthur a gnome? But now he's..." Patrick Starr asked meekly, Eggface immediately raised his brow and spoke like the gangster in the film, Crows Zero, saying, "Huh? I told you that he's an orc now. Do you have a problem? Get lost." "No, I don't have a problem," Patrick Star answered meekly. He was then taken to a special cave for the interview. The reporters were unable to move freely once they entered Eternal Kingdom and were mostly limited to a cave in the commerce area. While there, someone would bring food and water for them, though the meals cost them money. Before long, a young and strong orc walked in. He had the same black armored knight appearance and wielded the same weapon. That being said, the armor and weapon were a size bigger to suit the change from gnome to orc. "Are you Patrick Star?" Arthur walked in and sat in front of Patrick Star, placing his weapon at the side. "Can I start the mission now?" "Mission?" Patrick Star was taken aback, but he immediately understood that the orc had received a mission for the interview. Though he was unable to interview the gnome called Arthur, this orc looked much stronger than Arthur. "Greetings, I'm a reporter from the Winterfell Press. I would like to interview you. How are you faring in Eternal Kingdom? How does the Dungeon Lord treat you?" Patrick Star asked. Arthur frowned and said, "I'm very happy. I can challenge the instance dungeon with my friends every day. However, the equipment update is rather slow. If the game officials come up with renminbi priced equipment, I'll definitely buy them." Patrick Star was dumbstruck, but he continued to record the conversation at a fast pace. Arthur said, "Next question." Oh, that. Is there anyone that Lord Sherlock fancies? This is an area of concern for the noble ladies in Winterfell. Does he accept extramarital affairs or homosexuality? Does he accept relationships that will end in a 3-year jail term or a death sentence? Arthur knitted his brows and said, "Isn't Lilo the kind of woman that will cause Sherlock's death? I'm not sure about extramarital affairs and homosexuality, but he's definitely in an interracial relationship." "Lilo? Is she that famous fallen angel? Didn't she disappear after the battle with Samael?" Patrick Star got the scent of a slanderous tale. "Yes, it's updated. She's the Dungeon Lord of Victoria City, and we're now fighting with Victoria City daily at the Sighing Wilderness." Patrick Star didn't understand what Arthur was saying, but he recorded the content faithfully. As Patrick Star was about to ask the next question, Eggface pulled open the door and said, "Time has run out, so you have to come out. Sherlock's holding a news conference that costs 10 magic stones. Do you want to participate?" "Yes," Patrick Star shouted immediately. The news conference was held at the plaza in front of the Dungeon Lord main hall. To show Eternal Kingdom's hospitality, Sherlock decorated the plaza. He used the game as furniture, such as tables and stools, for decorations, and he also installed a last-minute horizontal banner with the words, "We warmly welcome all news workers who are visiting Eternal Kingdom." Sherlock also arranged 2 rows of combat-ready gamers to welcome the guests, even putting out some underground water as beverages. The beverages included red-hot underground water, steamed underground water, dry-taste underground water, and boiled underground water. Patrick Star was led to the 66th seat, welcomed with wild cheering from the gamers. His seat was a small one reserved for a goblin, but it was better than nothing. Patrick Star sat down and greeted the creatures at his sides. Lord Sherlock exited the Dungeon Lord main hall, and while he walked towards the stage, he chatted with and obtained a speech scroll from Brainiac. Sherlock cleared his throat before saying, "First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to all news workers on behalf of Eternal Kingdom's employees and citizens." Everyone applauded loudly. "We are aware that the second successor to Eternal Fire, Morgan, has indicated many times that he will defeat us. He also spread rumors about Eternal Kingdom's threat to the Underworld and started mobilizing his large army. We will make all necessary preparations to protect our interests, including imposing sanctions on all creatures and shops supporting Morgan. Morgan initiated the war, broke the basic rules of a dungeon, and destroyed the Underworld's hard-earned peace. His impudence will be a disgrace in the annals of history, and we would like to protest and condemn his actions." Sherlock spoke fervently on the stage, and tears welled up in Patrick Star's eyes. "There goes my 10 magic stones." Chapter 384. Magic Cannons Firing on the Dungeon. Good and peaceful days were always short. On the 5th day of the dungeon war, as Patrick Star was running out of money to stay in Eternal Kingdom, the Morgan army finally arrived. That was a normal morning, and Patrick Star was having his common clay and underground water. The ground shook violently. At first, Patrick Starr thought that it was an earthquake. However, there were shouts everywhere, and he quickly figured out that it wasn't an earthquake. Take a look, it's the ogre army. DMN, the monsters are finally here? Charge, charge. The citizens of Eternal Kingdom were very excited, and none of them looked worried or fearful. The reporters packed their belongings in a panic, looking to leave the dungeon before it was attacked. Patrick Starr was packing his luggage amidst the chatter of a few reporters. This was a fruitful trip. The legendary gnome, Arthur, is in a relationship with some goblin called Raintia. What? I heard that Arthur and Sylvanas were in love. Who's Sylvanas? What's the big deal? Do you know the black dragon that was sitting at the door collecting money? He only trims his fingernails once every 10 days. What? Once every 10 days? That's big news. Patrick Starr slowed down. Why did he become a reporter? He wondered why he wasn't intrigued by the news. His eyes lit up. He wanted to report on this dungeon war. A report based on a first-person perspective. He had made up his mind. He threw his luggage aside and ran outside the cave as though he was chasing after his dream. However, he was restrained on the ground by a few guards outside the door. They were deployed to prevent the reporters from running around. Patrick Starr shouted, "I want to see Lord Sherlock. I want to be a frontline reporter. I want to report on the war from a first-person perspective. Give me a chance." An orc rushed over and slapped him on the face as he shouted, "Such impudence. Do you think you can see Shirley anytime you like?" The orc then smiled at his comrades and said, "Gosh, it feels good to slap an NPC and deliver such righteous dialogue. Can I perform such daily missions? I have magic stones, I can give magic stones." Patrick Starr shouted immediately. The orc raised his palm, but he didn't slap Patrick Starr. The orc's expression changed many times as he helped Patrick Starr up. He then said gently to Patrick Starr, "Dearest, walk slowly. There's a rock over there. Shirley's in the Dungeon Lord main hall. Let's go and discuss things with him." Patrick Starr spent 50 magic stones to obtain the right to stay in Eternal Kingdom as a frontline reporter. Other reporters left Eternal Kingdom after obtaining basic news. As for news on the war, if they were able to interview a deserting soldier, that would suffice. They didn't have to risk their lives. Though Patrick Starr stayed behind in Eternal Kingdom, nobody told him what to do or helped him. They were busy with the war. Therefore, he had to depend on himself. Patrick Starr took out some magic stones and stopped a 5-member team. He recalled that one of them was Arthur, the gnome Dark Rider. He said, "I'm a Winterfell press reporter who is doing a report on the dungeon war. Can you protect me? I'll pay you money." Patrick Starr only had 10 magic stones, and he felt that it was insufficient to employ the 5 of them, so he quickly said, "I'll only need 2 bodyguards. Just 2 of you will do." "What?" Sylvanas, who was an orc, shouted loudly and gave Patrick Starr a fright. He changed his tune and said, "No, 1 bodyguard is enough. Is anyone willing to help me? You asked for 5 of us, and now you're changing to 1 of us. It's difficult for us. Hand over the 10 magic stones, we'll protect you," the orc Burning Chesthair said. Patrick Starr didn't expect to be able to employ 5 bodyguards with 10 magic stones, and they were orcs. They even had quality equipment. Nobody would believe Patrick Starr's luck. Patrick Starr was afraid they might change their minds, so he immediately paid the 10 magic stones. He couldn't hide if he wanted to make a war report, so he followed Arthur's team to the dungeon walls. Along the way, more orcs, houndhead men, and goblins walked towards Arthur. They were guild members of the Pioneer Alliance. It was safer for them to fight as a group. Patrick Starr was surrounded by a group of excited gamers, while not wearing pants explained the mission of protecting Patrick Starr. The other gamers were envious. The Pioneer Alliance was in charge of guarding a portion of Dungeon Gate. They walked up the tall dungeon walls and saw a dense black mass of ogres. The ogre army wielded a crimson flame flag, which was the insignia for eternal fire. At the front of the ogre army, there were ogres who carried shields, maces, pikes, and axes. They had different weapons and attire since they came from different tribes. Gathering so many tribes of ogres was a miracle. Patrick Starr felt chills when he saw the ogres that numbered in the tens of thousands. "Why don't you make a complaint to the Devil Management Committee? It's strange to have so many ogres," Patrick Starr said in a trembling voice to the orcs at the side. Complain? Are you complaining about customer service? An orc stared at him with his big eyes, and the orcs at the side started laughing. Can you be more immersive? He's talking about making a complaint to the Devil Management Committee. Gosh, is that a lead for a strange encounter mission? Eternal Kingdom is surrounded by the ogres and is in great danger. The heroic me will overcome all dangers to find the Devil Management Committee. Then, a great Devil Lord will rescue Eternal Kingdom, while Shirley will die guarding the dungeon. Our dungeon lord will then be that powerful Devil Lord. The orc looked at his comrades and said, "What? This plot is cool. Are you a hidden mole of the game plot? What's that? Shirley's going to die? Trying to play the tearing card? If Shirley dies, I'll not play the game. I'm here because of my hubby Shirley. I'll kill Shirley now to provide an empty spot in the game." The gamers outside are yearning for a position. The gamers enthusiastically discussed Sherlock's possible death. Patrick Starr had stayed in Eternal Kingdom for a few days, so he understood that Shirley was Lord Sherlock and that they used it as a pet name for their dungeon lord. Gosh, what's that? Isn't that exaggerated? While Patrick Starr was trying to obtain newsworthy information, he heard a goblin shouting. Patrick Starr looked in the same direction as the goblin. In the middle of the ogre army, 5 10-meter-long cannon barrels were transported by tens of ogres to the dungeon gate. What's that? A siege ram? I don't think they need 5 siege rams for smashing the dungeon walls. Are you being silly? No, don't they look like cannons? Impossible. Are cannons that long and thick? Are they navy guns being used as artillery? I think it's navy guns. I'm so happy. Patrick Starr was as pale as a sheet as he shouted, "Magic cannons." 5 magic cannons. Patrick Starr ran down the dungeon walls as he shouted, afraid for his life. The gamers were taken aback by Patrick Starr, laughing as they watched him flee. The reaction of the NPC was too realistic. The ogres had deployed the magic cannons within range. A fully armored superior devil stood behind the magic cannons, accumulating blue mana on his body and infusing it into the magic cannons. That was Morgan. Morgan's face was illuminated by the blue glow of mana. When he witnessed more and more mana accumulating in the magic cannons, he became malevolent. Die, Eternal Kingdom. Boom. The blue magic cannons blasted with deafening explosions. Chapter 385. Gundam. Gundam. The blue shots from the magic cannons flew across the sky like lightning. Eternal Kingdom's gate and dungeon walls were disintegrated in 5 places by the mana's tsunami. Even some of the gamers and their equipment were vaporized. After firing the volley, Morgan fell backward, but he was caught by the ogres. His body was drained, but he looked content as he raised his hand and shouted, "Attack with full force." The ogre army charged at Eternal Kingdom. Patrick Starr was immobilized on the ground. The dungeon wall behind him wasn't hit, but a portion of the wall a distance away was vaporized. There were no rock fragments, though. The gaping hole had rising and shimmering lights, which were formed from mana. War cries and thumping footsteps of the ogres could be heard in the distance. We're done for. It's the end. Patrick Starr thought that they were doomed. The dungeon gate and dungeon walls that could stop the ogres were gone, so the ogres flooded inside and massacred everyone. Patrick Starr wondered if he would be spared if he showed his reporter's pass. "Why are you sitting here? If you die, our mission will fail." While Patrick Starr was in a state of confusion, Not Wearing Pants ran to his side and helped him up. "Wait, let's flee. Eternal Kingdom has fallen," Patrick Starr shouted in panic. An ogre charged through the gaping hole in the dungeon wall. The ogre was fully armored and had a few arrows lodged in his body. An arrow from a ballista penetrated his shoulder, and the arrowhead was half the size of his head. The ogre screamed as he charged. Such a scene would normally cause terror in enemy soldiers and demolish their morale, but this was no ordinary battlefield. Countless orcs, goblins, and houndhead men screamed and charged chaotically at the ogre. Patrick Starr didn't understand why they were charging enthusiastically. "Gosh, I'm not bothering with you. Take care of yourself. That armor looks awesome." Not Wearing Pants stood up and shouted as he rushed towards a huge ogre that was surrounded by gamers. Wait a moment." Patrick Starr wanted to stop the orc who was rushing to his doom, but Not Wearing Pants had run far away. Peasant, another orc, stood by the side. Peasant stood beside Patrick Starr and looked at him until he became panicky. After some time, Peasant asked, "Do you have it? Do you have a strange encounter mission?" Give it to me, I can accept missions. Patrick Star wanted to ask him to flee, but Peasant looked behind Patrick Star and shouted loudly, "Gosh! Awesome! Arthur's awesome!" Patrick Star looked back and was stunned as though his head was hit by a hammer. He opened his mouth widely and said, "Shucks." When the battle started, Eternal Kingdom suffered serious casualties. That was what Morgan observed. After firing a volley of the magic cannons, Morgan felt extremely tired. But it was all worth it. Behind him were tens of thousands of ogres. The only things hindering his victory were the dungeon walls and the dungeon gate. Morgan wasn't happy with the improvements in mana technology, as it diminished the difference between the elite and inferior races. The benefits of a superior devil became fewer. Suddenly, he felt that certain mana technology was quite good. For example, these magic cannons were extremely efficient. Though he was exhausted, Morgan was smiling. He witnessed the ogres charging into Eternal Kingdom, swinging at and killing their foes. After obtaining the method to control the ogres, they became his power to conquer the world. Morgan threw back his head and laughed loudly, right up until he saw a metal monster bigger than a giant appearing out of a gaping hole. What the heck was that? Fill up the gap! Fill up the gap! Dragon Raja won't give an inch. We won't retreat even if we die. We won't retreat even if we die. Dragon Raja Guild's chairman, BT Kangren, wielded a large hammer and shouted loudly. The guild members around him dwindled. The combat power of the ogres was far superior. As BT Kangren was thinking of pulling back to the revival point, he heard loud thumping sounds among the chaos behind him. He turned his head back and saw an unpainted Gundam walking towards him. His first thought was that he wanted one, no matter the cost. The ogres had never seen such a monster, but they weren't afraid. Even if they fought against giants, they wouldn't be fearful. Even giants were on their menu. It was just a metal can. An ogre wielded a large mace and shouted to the ogres behind him, "Don't panic. Let me kill this giant. The honor is mine." The gigantic prototype robot had charged unsteadily over to him. The ogre grasped his mace tightly. Even if it was a metal monster, he only had to smash the head to kill it. That was what he believed. Then, a metal fist came down and squashed him, leaving a messy, grotesque pool. In the cramped Gundam cockpit. Adjust the synchronization rate to 50%, Arthur. Focus your attention. Your synchronization rate isn't able to fully utilize the potential of my great killing machine. Hemp rope technology shouted as he used a wrench to make some adjustments. The cockpit was filled with mechanical noises. I'm trying my best to concentrate. Arthur sat in the pilot seat. The seat and Arthur's body were marked with various kinds of rune mana formations, and mana engulfed the entire robot. It's not enough. The synchronization rate is low, so you're wasting mana. And an orc doesn't have much mana to begin with. Let a houndhead man control the Gundam. Hemp rope technology observed the outside situation via an observation hole and shouted, "Left side. There are many ogres on the left side." "What's that? A harpoon? Reintia?" Arthur was taken aback. Hemp rope technology was talking about a harpoon. Before he recovered, he felt something collide with the Gundam's body. Then there were many collision sounds, and the cockpit shook violently, almost causing Arthur to fall to the ground. "Steady yourself." A few ballistas were pushed out by the ogres, and they fired harpoons at Arthur's Gundam. The hooks of the harpoons grabbed the outer armor plating of the Gundam, and a few ropes ensnared the robot. Tens of ogres tried to pull the gigantic metal monster to the ground. The gamers wanted to help Arthur, but other ogres prevented them from doing so. With that many ogres, the gamers found it difficult to fill up the gaping holes in the dungeon walls. The Gundam wavered and was about to collapse. Arthur quickly moved a step back to steady himself, while hemp rope technology shouted, "Arthur! Use the weapon! Make haste! I got it!" Arthur shouted and raised his arm, causing the Gundam to lift its arm and grab a harpoon that was attached to it. The ballista attached to the harpoon was lifted off the ground, and many ogres fell to the ground. It was a chaotic scene. The gigantic Gundam raised its arm, which was now shimmering with rays from the rune mana formations. Mist also seeped out from the rune mana formations. As the Gundam clenched its metal fist, ka-cha, ka-cha, sounds were heard. It was as though energy was being accumulated. The Gundam moved towards the ballistas and gave them a punch. The metal fist landed on the ground and created a huge pit, and the subsequent violent quaking made the ogres unstable. That was only the beginning. With the punch, the ogres who wanted to pull the Gundam down were knocked to the ground. Then, the Gundam pulled out a huge 20-meter saber from its waist. The Gundam slashed with its saber, and all of the ropes were severed. It then held the saber with both hands and charged towards the ogre army. At the same time, a gamer in the crowd shouted, "For Eternal Kingdom." Chapter 386, Spectre Lich. Sylvanas wielded her short bow and ran along the dungeon walls, two sides of which had been demolished by the magic cannons. The current wall was only 400 to 500 meters long. Behind the wall were 300 gamers armed with crossbows, bolts, and 3 ballistas. "Reload the ballista," a gnome gamer shouted, and another gnome grabbed a large arrow and placed it on the ballista. 2 gnomes readied the ballista while another gamer took aim at the ogres and fired a volley. The large arrow flew out and penetrated 2 ogres before pinning them to the ground. "Continue firing." Sylvanas gave a loud scream and fired an arrow in a smooth maneuver. With her superb archery and the system's assistive aiming, the arrow hit an ogre who was attacking the Gundam. Though the arrow penetrated his buttocks and wasn't fatal, it still hit the target. It wasn't easy to successfully hit a target at such a long distance. Sylvana's confidence was greatly boosted, and she let loose another arrow. An orc fell with a dull thud. Sylvanas pretended not to see what happened and located her next target. The ogres below started using ladders to conquer this portion of the walls, which was inflicting massive damage to them. Though there was an overwhelming number of ogres, the gamers were on high ground. They only needed to shoot arrows down. Sylvanas killing her comrade was a rare incident. Moreover, there were no comrades outside the dungeon walls, so the gamers could even close their eyes while releasing arrows. Ladders soon filled the dungeon walls. It was only a matter of time before the dungeon walls were conquered. The gigantic Gundam charged through the battlefield with its 20-meter-long saber. Even the tallest ogre was only 4 to 5 meters in height. The 20-meter-long saber was like a grinding machine as it mowed down the ogres. The important factor was that the 5 magic cannons had fired off a volley, leaving Morgan's mana nearly exhausted. It was currently impossible for those high-caliber magic cannons to aim and fire at the Gundam. "Magicians, ogre magicians, charge up the magic cannons!" Morgan shouted at the ogres, and tens of ogre magicians ran over and started charging a single magic cannon. The gamers weren't the only ones who were fighting hard. Many ogre corpses suddenly stood up, and their empty eye sockets emitted faint white light as they wielded their weapons and walked in the opposite direction of the other ogres. Their targets were the magic cannons. An ogre collided with an undead ogre and cursed. He then discovered that the undead ogre was abnormal, having a smashed head and missing an arm. However, the undead ogre walked as though he was all right. The ogre wanted to ask about it, but the undead ogre smashed the ogre's head with a mace. Then, the undead ogre dashed towards the magic cannons. At the same time, countless undead ogres dashed towards the magic cannons, causing the ogres to start to panic. "Kill them. They aren't with us. Get lost. They are from our tribes. What are you doing? You are killing our tribe members. Are you tired of living? Give way. Give way. These ogres are undead." Morgan discovered the pandemonium as an undead ogre ran to him. Morgan understood what happened when he saw the undead ogre. It was the work of a lich. The once-in-a-thousand-years genius lich. Morgan unsheathed his weapon and decapitated the undead ogre, then shouted to the surrounding ogres, "Look at the eyes. The eyes of these undead ogres will give off light. A lich is controlling them." Morgan grabbed an ogre leader and shouted, "Organize a group and find the specter's eye. It's a floating eyeball. Destroy all of them and find that lich. He can't possibly control the undead from a distance. Find and destroy him." "Yes." The ogre leader acknowledged the order and led his ogres to find the lich. Morgan looked at the endless horde of undead ogres and the charging Gundam. It was going to take some time before Eternal Kingdom could be conquered. While Eternal Kingdom was embroiled in the battle with Morgan, the employees of Eternal Kingdom were temporarily resting in Winterfell's old district. Winterfell garrison guards stood guard at the entrance to prevent other creatures from attacking the citizens of Eternal Kingdom. During the dungeon war, all members of Eternal Kingdom were potential targets, though Morgan wasn't concerned about the employees of Eternal Kingdom. Eggface, Evelyn, Mufasa, Simba, Senior Beast, and Moros were gathered at the Adventurers Guild. They followed Sherlock's order and left Eternal Kingdom. Eternal Kingdom was engaged in the dungeon war, and they didn't have much combat power. Beast merely thought that his sacred light wasn't suitable for use in public. Everyone was quiet. Only the voices of the gamers in the Adventurers Guild were heard. The teleport portal was closed, so I can only kill myself to go back. Why kill yourself? They are busy defending the dungeon. The Winterfell missions belong to us now, nobody is competing with us. I don't like fighting in a siege war. The number of attackers is impressive. I heard there are tens of thousands of ogres. It must be an epic view. Gosh, tens of thousands of ogres attacking the dungeon? That exciting? I can't understand why I'm happy when Shirley's going to die. Evelyn was concerned as she looked at the chatting gamers, feeling a sense of uncontrollable worry. Lord Sherlock, Chapter 387, Alley Fights. The undead ogres were unable to damage the magic cannons. However, Brainiac could do more than controlling the undead ogres. A gray mist engulfed the entire battlefield. Under the effects of mana wind, it drifted to the location of the magic cannons. Mist of mana negation. An ogre shouted when he discovered the phenomenon, shift the magic cannons. The enemy is a legendary lich. He's releasing a mana negation spell. A group of ogres was busy moving the magic cannons, making it impossible to use them within a short period of time unless someone was able to neutralize the mist of mana negation. Morgan's mana was exhausted after firing the magic cannons, so he had no way to deal with the gray mist. Though the Gundam was killing the ogres and the gamers were continuously reviving, there was no change in the balance of power. Morgan's ogre army was gaining a superior advantage. After demolishing 5 portions of the dungeon wall, the torrential horde of ogres flooded in. Even though the Gundam guarded one of the holes, the other 4 holes were undefended. Soon, the ogres charged into Eternal Kingdom. Patrick Star ran for his life. There was an orc, peasant, beside him. During their escape, they introduced themselves. It's like this. I'm a young and ambitious orc. Are you from the Winterfell Press? Do you know the Dungeon Lord? He's Lassie. Oh, Nicholas. We call him Lassie, it's a pet name. It's hilarious. Yes, your name sounds like that good friend of SpongeBob SquarePants. Did you know that? Are you able to find a stable job for me in Winterfell? It's hard to earn magic stones. The fleeing orc was chatting non-stop. Patrick Star couldn't understand how he was able to chat nonchalantly at such a critical time. Patrick Star ran while holding a magic recording device, capturing as much as he could on video. When the Gundam appeared, Patrick Star started recording. Patrick Star felt excited when he saw the metal robot. It was as though he had seen his life's goal and ambition. Where are we going? Are we leaving by other exits? Patrick Star followed Peasant to a location filled with buildings and caves. It looked like the living quarters of Eternal Kingdom. Leaving? Where are we going? All of the exits were attacked, so we have no place to retreat. Do you wish for our homes to be destroyed by the ogres? Impossible. I will never endure being cuckolded. Patrick Star couldn't fully understand how the ogres were related to Peasant being cuckolded. But wait, was his wife living in Eternal Kingdom? The ogres wouldn't do such a thing to an orc. You haven't sent your wife away? This is very dangerous, Patrick Star said with concern. Wife? Wah, the NPC's thinking is filthy. I'm referring to my furniture. I'll not let them dirty my furniture. Peasant said. Many more orcs, houndhead men, and goblins ran from the depths of the dungeon. They were revived after being killed. Patrick Star was excited to see the crowd, thinking they were reinforcements. But he panicked when he saw that they were naked. The gamers ran over and started speaking. Gosh, Peasant, we're fighting valiantly on the front lines, and you're skiving here? Is this NPC that reporter? The one called Patrick Star? I'm so envious. We're being slaughtered by the ogres like dogs, while you're playing with the NPC and swindling his magic stones. You were enjoying yourselves too. I saw you killing with joy. Patrick Star was puzzled. Were they fighting a dungeon war? Patrick Star knew what they were doing from their behavior. They were here to prepare defenses. They carried huge rocks and transported the ballistas, crossbows, and bolts from the warehouse. They also gathered kerosene and torches. The obstacle rocks were placed at the entrance to the living quarters. After the dungeon gate was damaged, the first location to be attacked was the living quarters. Behind the living quarters were the teleport portal main hall and the dungeon lord main hall. The gamers wanted to fortify the area to prevent the ogres from advancing. This location was very close to the revival point, and the terrain was good for defense. Most importantly, the wealth of the gamers was all located here. A gamer shouted angrily, "I understand why the dungeon was designed in such a manner. Our homes were placed at the dungeon entrance to facilitate alley fights." It wasn't the time to complain, as the ogre army had arrived. Sylvanas saw the ogres scale the dungeon walls and tried her best to shoot arrows at them. There were no gamers at the base of the dungeon walls, only the Gundam, which was charging around on the battlefield. An ogre charged at Sylvanas with his huge axe. Sylvanas tore open her clothes and revealed the rows of bladder bombs underneath. She held a burning torch and shouted, "I'm earning lots of reputation points." The surviving gamers started shouting, "Gosh, veteran Vanas, you can't do that. My equipment." Sylvanas poked a hole in one of the bladder bombs and shoved a burning torch inside. Boom! The huge explosion killed Sylvanas and the surrounding ogres within a 10-meter radius. Many more ogres were flung from the dungeon walls, and they landed on a few unfortunate comrades. But it was the only explosion. Morgan noticed an explosion on a segment of the dungeon walls. It wasn't the first time those strong-willed warriors of Eternal Kingdom detonated explosives. They had been throwing those disgusting bladder bombs down from the dungeon walls since the start of the war. However, the power of the bladder bombs was limited in the face of tens of thousands of ogres. The dungeon gate was conquered. Morgan believed that most of the elite forces were dealt with at the dungeon walls. Though the ogre army was weakened, it was still within acceptable limits. The ensuing battles would be easier. Morgan was wary of that huge piece of moving metal. He had to get rid of it. With the fall of the dungeon walls, the mist of mana negation disappeared. The Lich had shifted his location. Morgan looked at the charging magic cannons and smirked. There was very little time left for Eternal Kingdom. The power of the great devil that can be used to destroy the world is mine. The dungeon war between Eternal Kingdom and Morgan didn't affect the surface world. The sky was sunny and cloudless above Victoria City. Lilo let the gamers prepare for war, not to go underground but to stay in Victoria City. "All warriors, get ready. Listen to my commands. The enemy will come from the teleport portals. Hold the defensive lines and kill them." Lancelot shouted as he rode on his horse and checked the defenses of the gamers. Compared to the casual Sherlock, Lilo was more stringent with the gamers of Victoria City. She ordered Lancelot to be the commanding officer and lead the attack on the invaders. As for the enemy and the time that they would arrive, Lilo said, "I don't know." Lilo knew that the enemy would exit from the teleport portal. Sherlock told her that, and her mission was to neutralize the attacks of the enemy. Lancelot looked at the merry gamers. He intended to motivate them to fight against the enemy and be fearless, but these gamers were protected by the Lord. Even if they died, they could revive. Hence the words of motivation were redundant. Looking at their happy faces, motivation wasn't required. The enemy was most likely coming from the Sighing Wilderness. The teleport portal was connected to the Sighing Wilderness, meaning that the evil creatures of the Underworld must be attacking Victoria City. This was what Lancelot speculated. The teleport portal shimmered with light. Lancelot raised his shield and readied his short sword. He inhaled deeply and saw the first ogre charge out from the teleport portal. The ogre looked befuddled, appearing as though he had come to the wrong place. But he had no chance to return as more ogres poured out. The huge airship flew in the underworld tunnel. Sherlock was on the airship and holding a map. Besides Sherlock, only Yoda was controlling the airship. Before the ogres surrounded Eternal Kingdom, Sherlock had left Eternal Kingdom and boarded the airship. Their target was Morgan's dungeon. All according to plan, Sherlock said as he observed the chaotic scene in Victoria City using a crystal ball. Chapter 388. I will show off. Ah! Screams rang beside his ears. Dragonborn placed his arms tightly behind the shield and pushed it to the front. His other hand wielded a long pike. This was the strong request from Lancelot, who said, "Though you are favored by God, according to the requirement of the Duchess, you have to reduce your casualties. Brace yourselves, and don't let the Duchess down." Though Lancelot said this, it was the mission reward that made the gamers form a defense line with their shields and pikes. When the battle started, the ogres charged out, and the Gamers formation came into effect. At least they didn't collapse like the Gamers in Eternal Kingdom. Though the Gamers were being mowed down rapidly, losing 2 to 3 front rows, they held their ground. Pom! A huge club smashed down heavily on Dragonborn's shield, and he slid back with his body cowered. The slanted angle of the shield deflected most of the impact of the club. If he braced for full impact, his arm would be broken. 2 long pikes thrust out from the side and stabbed the ogre that attacked Dragonborn. The arm of a human beside Dragonborn was smashed by a club. He had just put down his shield when an ogre plucked him by his head and threw him to the back. An ogre commanding officer stood on the front line and shouted at the ogres, "Don't retreat. The teleport portal is one-sided, you fools. Break the defensive line of the D*MNED humans." The Gamers of Victoria City couldn't understand the ogre, but it was obvious that he was the commanding officer. Dragonborn observed the location of the ogre commanding officer. He was very near. "Dragonborn, take a spear," Hid suddenly shouted, "I have a plan." Dragonborn was distracted, and an ogre smashed down with his hammer. Fortunately, Dragonborn evaded the hammer. Afterward, another gamer took his position on the front line as he fell back. "Don't tell me that you have a good plan to kill that commander." Sealhead Ling Chong moved to join Dragonborn and take a spear hit after he saw take a spear hit being forced out from the front line. It was easy to retreat from the front line, as every gamer wanted to be in the front row. "How did you know?" "Don't say anymore. My plan is perfect. I have 2 bladder bombs. We can use 1 bladder bomb to kill the ogre that is blocking the commander. The explosion will stun the commander, and we can make use of that chance to charge at him. You 2 will cover me while I charge with my pike. He will hack at me with his axe, and I will dodge elegantly." Take a spear Hid dodged, which was a rapid retreat to his left. "Wait, why are you so sure that the ogres will be stunned?" Sealhead Ling Chong asked. Take a spear Hid rebuked, "Of course they will be stunned, don't interrupt me. The axe will land close to me, but I'll not be hurt. The commander won't be able to retrieve his axe in time and will lose his balance. I will then charge and attack his waist. He won't die with just that, but then I'll draw out my precious sword." Take a spear Hid unsheathed his longsword and said, "I will leap and grab his neck with one hand while stabbing at his throat with my sword." "Why do I feel like this is a familiar scene?" Sealhead Ling Chong looked troubled. "Don't mention the incident with the ancient god's army. I'll not fail this time." Take a spear Hid shouted, "I will make it big this time. The entire forum will talk about my feat. I think it's worth a try." Dragonborn nodded and agreed with Take a spear Hit's plan. Sealhead Ling Chong had no reason to disagree. It was time for Take a spear Hid to showcase his skills. He took out 2 fused bladder bombs from Eternal Kingdom. "Let's go." Take a spear Hid shouted valiantly as he ignited the fuses and charged into the crowd, saying, "Give way." He shouted while tossing the bladder bombs towards the front. The 2 bladder bombs flew over the heads of the crowd and landed in the midst of the ogres before detonating. The explosion threw the ogres to the ground, and even those intact ogres at the sides were stunned. "Take action now." Take a spear Hid shouted and charged at the commander as he said, "Cover me, Dragonborn." Sealhead Ling Chong. Dragonborn and Sealhead Ling Chong followed behind Take a spear Hid's charge. The shockwave of the explosions created a small time window for Take a spear Hid to charge forward with his pike. The ogre commanding officer saw 3 daring and howling humans charging at him. He was furious because the destination of the teleport portal was different from what he expected. He wanted to retreat, but the teleport portal was one-sided. They were sent to an unknown location, and they had no way to return. Their original mission was to teleport to the interior of Eternal Kingdom, where they would start the destruction and disable the dungeon. That was their goal. They weren't here to kill humans, fairies, and elves. The ogre commander was angry because the humans were looking down on him. The puny humans dared to charge at an ogre? He lifted his heavy axe and faced the 3 humans as he shouted to the other ogres, "Give way. I'll eat the 3 of them." The ogres formed a circle to let the commander show off. The ogre commander slashed the heavy axe on the ground, his dominant aura overwhelming the 3 humans. "I'm charging." Take a spear Hid shouted and picked up his pace. He raised his pike and focused. The ogre commander lifted his huge axe and hacked at him. "Now." There was a glint in Takeaspirhit's eyes, and his feet shifted as he leapt to the left. The axe landed squarely on his shoulder and split him in half. Takeaspirhit was immobilized, and he moaned twice before dying. Shucks, that silly dude, Sealhead Ling Chong cursed, but he discovered that the commander's axe was stuck in Takeaspirhit's body. He shouted, "Dragonborn, take action now." Dragonborn knew that it was the opportunity of a lifetime. He unsheathed the crimson sword with trailing crimson afterimages. Leaping sky high, he used his hand to grab the armored scale on the commander's throat. At the same time, his other hand stabbed the crimson sword into the commander's throat. The ogre commander backed up in disbelief. The sword in his throat prevented him from making any sound. His hands that were holding the huge axe relaxed, and he spurted fresh blood while his face became an ominous red. Then, he knelt down on one knee. Dragonborn released his hand and rolled on the ground to make a safe recovery. Immediately after, the ogre commander collapsed to the ground and remained motionless. Dragonborn stepped on the head of the ogre commander and yanked his crimson sword from the ogre's throat. Besides the wild cheering of the gamers, he was met with the furious roars of the charging ogres. The ogres from the ogre fortress occupied the sighing wilderness that was beside the outposts of Victoria City and Eternal Kingdom. The teleport portal of Victoria City was destroyed, while the teleport portal of Eternal Kingdom was kept intact. The ogres didn't know that the destination of the teleport portal was Victoria City instead of Eternal Kingdom. While the ogres were entering the teleport portal, an invisible airship was in the sky above the ogre fortress. After the flashing of mana cannon shots blew off the top of the ogre fortress. The ogres that were gathered at the teleport portal dispatched a team to return to the ogre fortress. Sherlock extended his wings and descended through the rooftop cavity, his black bat wings flapping rapidly. Gray dust surrounded Sherlock as he used the lift from his wings to land steadily on the ground. It was pitch black, with only a pair of yellow eyes staring at Sherlock. "Greetings, Polio. Didn't I tell you to be obedient? Yet you colluded with Morgan. As your master, I'll have to teach you a lesson," Sherlock said with a smile. Chapter 389. I may beat you to death. In the darkness, a tattooed ogre with a pair of yellow eyes walked out. It was Polio. "Welcome, Sherlock." Polio walked out from the dust and stood before Sherlock. Sherlock maintained his posture. He didn't feel short with his 5-meter height when he stood in front of Polio. "You won't even take along your Lord Overseer? I remember the first time we met, you were cordial. This is making me sad." Sherlock sighed and showed an expression of regret. "It seems like you already knew my plan. When did it start?" Since you started meeting Morgan at Bancasia." Sherlock thought for a while and said, "Morgan found a book left by Michelangelo, one that depicted detailed methods for controlling the ogres. According to the relic of Michelangelo, there is no 100% method for controlling them. Michelangelo brought the seeds of the underworld with him and incited the war between the two worlds, depending on the loyalty of the ogres to fight for him. I figured that you let Morgan find the book intentionally." "That's right, I let him take a look. That superior devil thought he used a lot of effort to find it." Polio smiled and said, "It has only been a few thousand years, and the standard of superior devils has dropped. It's not that bad. I know of a few superior devils who have good standards." Sherlock recalled, but he returned from his thoughts and said, "Let's talk about an important topic. Morgan thought he could use you to control the ogres. The book that he found was supposed to show the method for controlling you. After releasing you from Bancasia, he had you infiltrate here. After the start of the dungeon war, you were supposed to control the ogres and attack the interior of Eternal Kingdom. Perhaps your initial suggestion was for me to control the ogres and have them guard Eternal Kingdom. When you discovered that I was connecting the Sighing Wilderness and Eternal Kingdom with a teleport portal, you decided to take over the portal and send the ogres directly to my dungeon. Is that correct? Did you suggest that?" Polio didn't respond. Looking at Polio's expression, Sherlock thought that he was right. Not a bad plan. I have a few questions." Polio interrupted and said, "Are you going to ask me why I betrayed you?" "Hee. Do you really think that you're Michelangelo? I was never loyal to you. Michelangelo is dead, and his power belongs to me. No, I'm not going to ask you such trivial questions. I'm willing to give you the power to destroy the world. Unfortunately, the memories and power can't be given to you just like that. Do you know Alexandria?" Sherlock brushed the dust from his shoulder, not expecting Polio to answer. Alexandria, the son of the Grand Duke? Why would I know such a paltry character? You don't seem to know the inner workings. Sherlock nodded and moved his body. Prepare yourself, I intend to beat you up. You wasted a lot of my resources and made me very tired. I'm very angry, so I'll not have any mercy. Don't blame me if I beat you to death. Huh? What nonsense are you saying? Ooh, Polio laughed loudly. Before he finished speaking, Sherlock flashed in front of him. Sherlock's fist split the air and carried a trail of afterimages as he punched Polio's face. His talking mouth was distorted by the punch, and his teeth flew out. Pom! With a loud impact, Polio's body flew in the direction of the punch. Just as Polio's leg lifted off the ground, Sherlock performed an opposite turning back kick and hit Polio's back heavily. Boom! Polio's body flew out this time and crashed into a fortress wall, and the wall collapsed, becoming a ruin. Sherlock adjusted his clothing after executing the two moves, then walked towards Polio. Sherlock moved the debris, which revealed the rough palm of an ogre. He grabbed the ogre's wrist and pulled him out. The ruin collapsed with crumbling sounds after the ogre was pulled out. Sherlock looked at the lifeless body, the listless wide-opened eyes, the distorted mouth, and the body that was deformed at a 90-degree angle. The tattooed ogre was dead, with no remaining breath. Tisk! The characteristic of this devil is troublesome, Sherlock muttered to himself as he examined the tattooed ogre's body. Black mist flowed towards Sherlock from all directions. Within the mist were many yellow pupils. Such strong physical power. Only my previous master had such power. I don't have a physical body. Don't underestimate the power of the 72 devil gods. Polio's voice sounded hollow after leaving the ogre's body. The black mist spun around Sherlock like a tornado, but the mist dissipated as Polio screamed, seeming to be in pain. How can it be? What is that? Polio shouted. The black mist fled in all directions, but before Polio's black mist flew too far, he bounced back as though he had hit a glass wall. Sherlock stood his ground, and a shining mana rune formation appeared underneath his feet and extended outwards by about 100 meters. That was the allowed space for the black mist. Sherlock smiled and looked at Polio. Who do you think provided the mana rune formation used to imprison you in Bankasia? It was me. Are you happy? Are you surprised? Sherlock put on finger sleeves that were drawn with dense mana rune formations. When two finger sleeves touched, the light rays of the mana rune formations became brighter. They weren't ordinary finger sleeves. Sherlock walked towards the mist and said, I told you that I wouldn't be merciful. Don't be beaten to death. In the castle of Victoria City, Lilo drank her tea gracefully, and the three hamsters had a towel draped on their arms. They were serving Lilo afternoon tea. The chaotic situation outside was in stark contrast to the peaceful afternoon tea. DMN, why are there so many humans? Someone said in the Underworld common language. Gosh, these monsters are brutal. Victoria City is being demolished, said a gamer in the Surface World common language. Hold the line, all hold the line. Don't let the ogres break through, said someone in the Surface World common language. Destroy the obstacles. Kill those fairies who are using mana. Kill them, an ogre said in the Underworld common language. Take a spear hit. DMNU. Why are you stealing my kills? Cursed a gamer in the Surface World common language. There were various explosions, as well as the laughter and furious bellows of ogres. Lilo wiped her lips and stood up, walking towards the door. Why is the battle taking so long? Lilo was very unhappy. Chapter 390. Scene Boss. The ogres screamed wildly as they waved their weapons. They had conquered the living quarters of Victoria City and the teleport portal main hall. Some ogres even tried to invade the castle, but they were driven back by valiant gamers. However, from the current situation, it was only a matter of time before the castle was taken. The revival point in front of the castle was occupied by the ogres, so when the gamers revived, they would be cut down by the sea of ogres. A lot of the gamers gave up on revivals, making complaints on the discussion forum, especially in the post title, Dungeon War Live discussion post. Most of the replies were from the Victoria City faction. The gamers of Eternal Kingdom could defend themselves with the Underworld terrain, but most of the gamers of Victoria City had given up. Fallen Dawn Star. This is favoritism. Is Victoria City your stepchild? Competition novices. We are fighting very hard, but there are simply too many ogres. Peach juice. Can gamers of Eternal Kingdom save us? Our city is gone. Beginner's village head. This is hilarious. Why are you so trashy? Take a look at our Gundam. If the ogres step into our living quarters, consider that we lose the war. Picture. Serving is most important. Why doesn't Victoria City have a Gundam? How much does it cost? We'll crowdfund the project. Dark Armored Cavalry. Silly dudes, the Gundam wasn't bought by us, it was produced by one of the gamers in Eternal Kingdom. Make one if you so desire. The post was garnering hundreds of replies every second, which were pessimistic views of the Victoria City faction. That all changed when Lilo came out of the castle, the replies becoming frenzied snapshots of her. Wilderness Furry Kid. Lilo is here. The splendor of Duchess Lilo. Picture. Gluttonous Lao. Great. Duchess Lilo is punching each ogre. Picture. Demon Breeze. I'm not saying anything. Take a look at the pictures. Picture. Temperamental sky-changing clouds. Make haste and revive. We have occupied the revival point. As the post described, Lilo came out of the castle wielding a large pike that was completely out of proportion to her body. A thunderstorm of steel against flesh occurred where she went. All of the ogres that were within her attack radius were reduced to minced meat and blood mists. The ogres disappeared rapidly, not because they retreated, but because they were being decimated by Lilo. Lilo walked unobstructed to the revival point. Many naked gamers came out from the revival point and charged at the ogres, their fists clenched. The horn of victory sounded in Victoria City. In the ogre fortress situated in the sighing wilderness. In the dark mana formation, sounds of a fist flailing and Polio's moans filled the air. Occasionally, a powerful impact hit against the barrier of the mana formation and created strong ripples. Polio was beaten for 10 minutes before the mana formation vanished. Sherlock tidied up his hair, which had become messy after the strenuous exercise. He then calmly removed the finger sleeves and put them into his pocket. In front of him was a wavering black figure that looked like a pool of dark liquid. The black figure trembled and looked like he was going to flee. However, he was unable to move. Sherlock knelt in front of Polio and started drawing rune mana formations on his body. With the completion of the rune mana formations, magical white rays engulfed Polio, causing the black figure to shrink rapidly before turning into a physical form, a black kitten. The mana of the rune mana formation quickly vanished from the kitten's body. He isn't dead. Sherlock grabbed the kitten's neck and lifted Polio. I was wrong. Please don't beat me, meow. Polio, who was now a kitten, gave off strange meowing sounds. Even Polio was dumbstruck by his meowing, and he quickly asked, "What's happening?" My voice? Meow? Sherlock held the black kitten in his arms and extended his wings as he shrugged his shoulders. You are a black kitten, now and forever. Isn't your meowing lisp normal? This was created by your master. My master created this? Sherlock flapped his wings and flew through the rooftop cavity and towards the airship. He descended onto the deck of the airship and looked down, observing the ogres that were originally controlled by Polio and who were now coming out of the teleport portal incessantly. All of them looked dazed. The ogres from opposing tribes even glared at each other and started bickering and fighting. More ogres formed groups as they ran around the sighing wilderness, looking for suitable locations to pitch camps for their tribes. Polio lost control of the ogres, so they became like scattered sand. Each tribe would have, at most, a few hundred ogres. Which looked like the current situation. Let's go back, Yoda. Sherlock placed Polio on the deck, and he curled his body nervously. Polio straightened his tail, and his hair was standing on end. He looked like a real kitten. Sherlock said to Polio, "Welcome to Eternal Kingdom. Forget about your identity as one of the 72 devil gods. You are now an honored employee. I have prepared a slavery deed for you. I mean, a labor contract with a lifetime duration. You'll be pleased." Sherlock said, "Your first mission is to attack Morgan and disband the ogres." Yoda controlled the airship and flew towards Eternal Kingdom. The monsters that attacked Eternal Kingdom and Victoria City stopped after the valiant gamers defended themselves for more than 2 hours. The gamers from Eternal Kingdom and Victoria City felt that it was the result of their valiant battle. Seeing the ogres fleeing, the gamers pursued relentlessly. However, the gamers were unable to keep up with the speed of the ogres. Some impatient gamers rode their darting birds to give chase and perished with their darting birds. Seeing the pathetic states of those gamers, others decided not to give chase. However, according to Morgan, the war hadn't ended. "Don't run, you are trash, cowards." Morgan waved his longsword and slashed at the fleeing ogres. His 100 proximity ogre guards fled at the first opportunity. He couldn't understand why they would flee. Did he not follow Michelangelo's method to control the ogres? Why did such a thing happen? Morgan's behavior infuriated the escaping ogres. They were being controlled without their knowledge, and after being freed, they wanted to flee immediately. After all, they were in the territory of a superior devil and an underworld army. There were corpses and signs of explosions everywhere, and a gigantic Gundam was killing ogres in a frenzy. Those crazy fellows were even throwing bladders that caused massive explosions. It was horrifying. When had the ogres encountered such a terrifying battle? They had to escape from their impending deaths. Morgan's willful killing of the ogres antagonized them, especially when they realized that he had enslaved them and made them into cannon fodder. The ogres were thoroughly enraged. At that point, the eyes of some ogres started to emit yellow light. Large groups of ogres charged at Morgan, who had exhausted his mana, and he let out a final, frustrated roar before he was engulfed by the ogre army. The war ended. While there were small pockets of ogre resistance, most of them had fled. The gamers then began salvaging the battlefield, retrieving their own equipment as well. Whether the equipment was damaged or intact, the gamers could exchange it for small amounts of reputation points and game currency. Though they were being exploited, it was better than losing the equipment outright. The gamers were used to the exploitation by the game producers. Arthur was also salvaging the battlefield. He had plentiful mana, but it vanished, and without mana, the Gundam came to a halt. In the sea of corpses, they discovered the blood-stained Morgan, who was panting hard. The gamers were excited. The scene boss had arrived. Chapter 391. Sorry, I was wrong. Morgan slashed at the screaming and charging goblins that were like pestering flies, and they fell to the ground. Morgan had tried his best to exert his dominance, and even a huge dragon would be wary of him. When he fought with the rebelling ogres, he used the same method to slow them down, even causing some of them to flee in panic. But now, goblins were charging at him like mad dogs. Endless streams of goblins, gnomes, houndhead men, and orcs charged at him. They were like pests. Arthur wielded his black longsword and shield as he moved around to look for Morgan's weakness. After the ogres fled, Arthur discovered Morgan, who killed hundreds of ogres. Then, Morgan was surrounded by the gamers. Arthur and his team had been annihilated once. The boss is difficult to kill. All tanks beware. Let the individual gamers wear him down. Not wearing pants shouted to the gathered guild members. Currently, only the members of small guilds and individual gamers were attacking Morgan. The bigger guilds like the Pioneer Alliance didn't attack, knowing they would be killed. The guild members of the Meat Vegetable Rice Alliance had assembled, and they started attacking Morgan. After a volley of arrows, they killed all the individual gamers who were attacking Morgan, but Morgan remained completely intact. Some of the 200 to 300 arrows that were fired hit Morgan, but they couldn't get past his defenses. The gamers started bickering. Don't fire arrows. They are our people. You're killing our people. How do we fight if we don't use arrows? It's a confirmed death if we fight at close range. Nonsense. Attack immediately. The boss is dying. He's bleeding profusely. What the heck? Which eye of yours saw the boss bleeding profusely? He's still mowing down gamers. Be reasonable. Damage and health points aren't related. The boss is covered in blood. This is a classic case of being near death. Stop the nonsense and inflict damage on him. So what if we're killed? We'll fire arrows and revive if we're killed. The revival point is close by. Morgan couldn't understand why the gamers were bickering. He was in a craze. He had the upper hand, but now it had deteriorated. His ogre army had collapsed, and Lord Sherlock was still unwilling to fight with him. Instead, these pesky ant-like gamers were irritating him. While Morgan was busy mowing down the gamers, Brainiac slowly walked towards the pathetic and exhausted superior devil. The gamers thought that it was a plot animation, so a small portion of them stopped attacking to watch. But most of the gamers continued attacking, wanting to use the chance to inflict heavy damage. Lich, where's your master? Get Sherlock to come out. Even if I lose, I'll lose in his hands. Let these pieces of trash bug off. Morgan shouted, but he couldn't stop the ant-like gamers from attacking his legs. Brainiac observed the situation and said without emotion, "Lord Sherlock isn't in the dungeon. He gave me a price list for your case." As Morgan was about to ask about the price list, a gnome stabbed his Eternal Kingdom standard short sword into Morgan's calf. As it was a piece of white standard equipment, the weapon didn't cause any harm. Instead, it broke in half. Morgan was in pain, and he kicked the gnome, who he flew out. As Morgan revealed his weakness, the charging gamers made use of the chance to inflict damage. Brainiac disregarded Morgan, who was mowing down the gamers. He took out a form and said, "According to Lord Sherlock's arrangements, if you wish to leave intact, you'll have to pay 10 million magic stones. If you leave with a missing arm, the payment will be lowered to 8 million magic stones. The loss of 2 arms will reduce the payment to 6 million magic stones." Brainiac spoke like a robot, and Morgan responded with an angry roar and a spinning fireball. Brainiac lifted a hand, and gray mana accumulated in front of him. The fireball collided with the mana wall and exploded. The heatwave scorched the nearby gamers, and the hair on their bodies was burnt and emitted the smell of barbecue. "I see that you don't wish to pay. According to Sherlock's order, we'll send you to the Hades spirit world." Brainiac put away the form and took out a magic wand that looked like a tree branch. He aimed the magic wand at Morgan as he said to the gamers, "Attack warriors, I'll cover you. I'll kill you." Morgan charged towards Brainiac, but there were countless gamers between them, and the gamers wouldn't flee like the ogres. Patrick Star held his magic recording device in a daze as he captured the scenes of the post-war Eternal Kingdom. As a war reporter who went through the ordeal, he saw many things that shook him to the core. A weak goblin sacrificed himself to an ogre's club to allow his comrades to inflict damage. The archers on top of the blasted dungeon walls knew that they didn't have a chance to survive, but they continued firing arrows and throwing bladder bombs. When they saw the ogres being killed, they would reveal expressions of joy. Many times, Patrick Star witnessed how the gamers wrapped themselves with bladder bombs and dashed into the ogre crowd. Sometimes, they would even injure their comrades accidentally. How many casualties were there in this war? Patrick Star wasn't sure. He only saw numerous gamers sacrificing themselves to protect their homes. They were fearless, and death was the highest honor for them. What about their corpses? Wait, where were their corpses? Patrick Star was dumbfounded. He only saw ogre corpses and was unable to find any corpses from Eternal Kingdom. He pondered for a while before he started tearing up. Their corpses were being eaten by the ogres. That was the case. Patrick Star's vision was blurred by his welling tears. To protect their homes and fight against the ogres, their corpses were eaten by the ogres. This was the sin committed by Morgan. Patrick Star trembled as he recalled the terrifying face of Morgan. The second successor of Eternal Fire succumbed under the combined assault of Brainiac and the citizens of Eternal Kingdom. He stripped himself of all equipment and threw his weapon aside, then knelt down, lowered his head, and said respectfully, "Sorry, I was wrong. I'll pay 10 million magic stones. Please don't kill me or stab my buttocks, please." Most of Morgan was covered by mosaic since he was naked. The gamers that didn't give up on trying to attack the vulnerable parts of Morgan were being persuaded by Brainiac to leave. The main factor was that other gamers received the mission, appeasement, and dragged their vengeful comrades away. They said, "Enough, stop stabbing. The boss has entered the invincible plot mode. He has surrendered his weapon and equipment. Stop fighting, he won't die." The gamers were happy to see Morgan's loot, though they had to let Brew appraise the equipment before he decided whether the equipment would be auctioned. What if Sherlock decided to use Morgan's equipment? Equipment with many bugs wouldn't be given to the gamers. Brew explained, "Gamers will complain about a piece of equipment that upsets the balance of power in the game." That was Brew's explanation. Patrick Star shut off his magic recording device. He had captured the outside and interior of Eternal Kingdom. Next, he was going to interview the gamers and Lord Sherlock. No matter what the cost was, he felt it would be worthwhile. Because this time, it was big news. That was what Patrick Star believed. In a dark room, a sludge monster stood at the doorway, while a superior devil sat on a sofa and looked at the document in his hand, sighing. "This is totally unexpected," the superior devil said. "Morgan and Polio were defeated." "Yes, Lord Alexandria." The sludge monster moved his body, and Alexandria nodded and smiled as he said, "No problem." "How is that plan progressing?" "Very smooth, Lord Alexandria." "Good, you may leave." Alexandria ordered the sludge monster. The door was closed, and the room fell into darkness again. A fireball appeared, and a letter dropped from the flames. The letter had the words, "To Lord Alexandria, Judge Onionhead," on it. Chapter 392. Version 0.36 Update Log. 15 days after the dungeon war in Eternal Kingdom. Palm. A special metal cage was secured and locked. In it was Morgan, who lowered his head dispiritedly. He was captured and pronounced guilty by the Devil Management Committee and was to be sent to Bankasia for his prison sentence. He wasn't sentenced due to the dungeon war with Eternal Kingdom. He was sentenced for infringing on the rights of laborers and creating a dangerous organization. Morgan bought a dungeon and dismissed all of the employees, who then filed a complaint at the Underworld Labor Union. The dangerous organization sentence was because Patrick Starr wrote an article on the dungeon war that depicted Morgan's recruitment of the Ogre Army and how he committed heinous crimes during the war. Patrick Starr also mentioned the heroic struggles of Eternal Kingdom's citizens. There were pictures and videos, and within a few days, they created an uproar. The Devil Management Committee used these as evidence to sentence Morgan. Though there were no explicit rules that prohibited the use of the barbaric ogres, it was a dangerous act that would destabilize the peace of the underworld, so the Devil Management Committee pronounced him guilty. Was Morgan trying to be the second Michelangelo? Because the Devil Management Committee pronounced Morgan guilty, Sherlock kept Morgan's 10 million magic stones and imprisoned him in Eternal Kingdom. The Devil Management Committee then sent an envoy and arranged for a beetleman with tools for imprisoning a superior devil, taking Morgan away. Sherlock stood at Eternal Kingdom's entrance and waved goodbye to Morgan as he shouted warmly, "Come by next time." Seeing Morgan leaving, one wondered how long he would be imprisoned. Sherlock didn't know and wasn't interested. "Lord Sherlock, come by next time?" I was almost conquered. "Lord Sherlock, if you were late by an hour, the ogres would have invaded the living quarters and the dungeon lord main hall," Bruce said with agitation as Sherlock smiled and bade Morgan farewell. "Didn't they fail?" "Don't be angry, Brew. As an experienced dungeon core, your reaction isn't on par with your wisdom. Even if Morgan came to you and absorbed your energy, you could have given the order for the gamers to detonate themselves with Morgan," Sherlock said casually while he walked towards the dungeon. "Lord Sherlock, I'm not the Yggdrasil of World of Warcraft," Brew protested, but he was ignored. It wasn't possible to repair the damage sustained by Eternal Kingdom within 15 days, but the repairs were underway. Sherlock used his magic stones to buy raw materials, and the gamers used their labor to repair the dungeon. It cost about 1 million magic stones. The gamers gathered at the repair site and watched the plot animation of Morgan being led away. The gamers liked Morgan. During these 10 days, when Morgan was imprisoned in Eternal Kingdom, the gamers would visit him and curse at him with vulgarities. Morgan had become one of the important tourist attractions. On the discussion forum, the gamers of Victoria City requested to visit Morgan by attacking Eternal Kingdom. For this, they had very seriously planned 2 routes. First, they would occupy the Sighing Wilderness and Eternal Kingdom's teleport portal. Using the portal, they would travel to Eternal Kingdom. It wasn't clear whether the gamers of Victoria City could enter the teleport portal, but it was a possibility. 2. They could travel through the Spider's Lair to Eternal Kingdom. They tried both routes but failed miserably. In the first case, before reaching Eternal Kingdom, they failed. They conducted a sneak attack in the middle of the night and successfully occupied the teleport portal of Eternal Kingdom's outpost. However, they couldn't use it. They saw the notice. As there is no battle campaign scenario, the teleport portal of the opposing faction cannot be used. The gamers of Victoria City tried to reach Eternal Kingdom via the Spider's Lair. As there were many underground spiders, they formed a strong 2,000-member siege contingent, including members from the Hoodlum Yoga Association and for that night with Sherlock. But they were annihilated in the Spider's Lair. Even the gamers of Eternal Kingdom were unable to defeat the waves of underground spiders created by the 10 Spider Queens. Therefore, it was impossible for the inferior gamers of Victoria City to defeat the spiders. Once Morgan had been led away, there was no reason for the gamers of Victoria City to visit Eternal Kingdom. Sherlock was indifferent to the behavior of both factions. He was only concerned about the gamers working hard and earning profits, mainly because he had to purchase a level 3 dungeon core. According to market prices, a level 1 dungeon core cost 25 million magic stones. That was correct, there was inflation. As for a level 3 dungeon core, it cost 1 billion magic stones. With Sherlock's current magic stones, Sherlock checked the balance of his magic stone card. After calculating the various compensations, rewards, the gamer's salary, and profits from selling materials, as well as deducting the cost of materials, repairs, and factory costs, he only had 30 million magic stones. Sherlock depended on the gamer's income and let Brew do a simple calculation. Brew replied, excluding inflation, it will take roughly 500,000 to 1 million years to reach the target of 1 billion magic stones for purchasing a level 3 dungeon core. It was a disappointing answer. Don't worry, Lord Sherlock, I have a detailed plan for upgrading the dungeon core. Isn't the dungeon core of Winterfell available? With our combat power, it'll be difficult to conquer Winterfell. However, if we pretend to send the Gundam to Winterfell for an exhibition, start a rebellion, and kidnap Nicholas, we can use him like our puppet to control Winterfell. In terms of creatures and resources, Brew continued to nag, but Sherlock had walked into the Dungeon Lord main hall and started editing new updates on his computer. Eggface was performing his customer service job. He was emotionless. Eggface was quite familiar with his job. He was used to the gamer's strange questions and various harassment tactics. Next to Eggface was a black kitten, Polio. Polio looked at Eggface's screen and asked, "These fellows, are they the fellows outside? Are they called gamers?" Polio talked incessantly. Eggface made a disdainful tisk sound and caressed Polio's neck. Soon, Polio emitted comfortable hulu, hulu sounds. All of a sudden, Polio meowed and stretched his body as his hair stood on end. He shouted, "I'm not a kitten." Sherlock wasn't bothered by Eggface and Polio. He started editing his updates. Version 0.36 update log. In the current battle campaign scenario, the ogres and Morgan colluded. They attacked Eternal Kingdom and Victoria City. With the strong willpower of our warriors, we stopped their attack and destroyed Morgan's evil plan. But the crisis isn't over yet. We updated Dungeon War. The Dungeon War was updated secretly. You have completed the Dungeon War. I am just informing you. We updated an NPC's state. Morgan is in Bankasia. Morgan was sent to Bankasia. If you have the chance, visit him there. We updated the maps of Victoria City and Eternal Kingdom. Ogre tribes appeared in the surrounding areas of Victoria City and Eternal Kingdom. Before they assemble for an attack, destroy them. This is now part of the daily mission. We updated with a new NPC, Kitten Polio. Sherlock's new pet is called Polio. Though he has the same name as the ogre leader called Polio, they are different. Gamers will be able to see this new NPC soon. He is joining Eternal Kingdom and will help Lord Sherlock with his heavy responsibilities. We updated a new bug, unusable Gundam. You cannot use the Gundam now. That is it. We updated a new daily mission, constructing an outpost at the crossroad. Victoria City and Eternal Kingdom have a common enemy, and there's an urgent need for collaboration. After the leaders of the two factions completed their discussion, it was decided that there would be a peaceful outpost at the crossroad that connects the Underworld and Surface World. Both factions will create the future together. Chapter 393. Arthur's Mana Skills Book. Sherlock's post garnered enthusiastic responses from the gamers. Maximilian Seed. It means we have to carry more bricks. I have double ID. Wah, there's a kitten. Can we cuddle it? Trails of Cold Rays. When is the official version 1.0? Evil officials are scheming against the Emperor. Be reasonable. The neutral city should be called Dalaran or Shatrath. Has Lord Sherlock been doing this? Meow? What has this got to do with dominating the world? Meow. Polio sat gracefully on Sherlock's computer table and licked his paw. He only discovered that something was wrong after a few licks. He wasn't a kitten. He dry coughed 2 times to hide his embarrassment. Dominate the world? Sherlock frowned. He didn't understand Polio's meaning of dominating the world. Did he ever mention that? His dream was to become the greatest dungeon lord. Having such power, as well as undead servants, a promising young black dragon, and most importantly, Lord Sherlock's power of Michelangelo, meow. And meow, Polio turned to look at Eggface behind him and said, "That small black dragon has been saying that he is the world-dominating dragon and master of darkness. I thought you must be planning to dominate the world. No, those are purely his wild imaginations, Sherlock said. Polio stood up and turned around gracefully on the table, then faced Sherlock and sat down. He licked his black paws and said, though they're his wild imaginations, if you don't dominate the world with your power, it'll be a great pity. Though I was in prison for thousands of years, I'm still knowledgeable about the outside world. We can start with Winterfell. It's that simple, meow. Polio squinted his yellow pupils and extended one of his paws while showing his fierce face. But Sherlock grabbed his neck, walked to the door, and threw him outside. A gamer dashed over and shouted, "Gosh! How can I cuddle the cat in this mission? I only keep dogs." Polio's hair stood on end, and he growled, "Grr." The Ogre Fortress Instance Dungeon had taken a back seat to the dungeon war, only being reopened after Morgan and his ogre army were defeated. There was no change in the Instance Dungeon. 5 gamers would enter the Ogre Fortress and fight against a lone ogre. Though it was difficult, the elite team of the Pioneer Alliance achieved victory within 10 days. After Arthur and his comrades defeated the ogre, they opened the treasure chest behind it. A green excellent axe called the Ogre's Great Axe, 10 silver coins, a superior shield called the Sighing Shield. Gosh, a mana skills book. Not Wearing Pants took out all of the loot from the treasure chest, exclaiming in astonishment at the mana skills book. Gosh, it's a real mana skills book. Aren't we lucky today? Peasant ran over and looked pitifully at his friends. Please give me the book. I'm a magician. No, I also want to have mana skills as an archer. Let's roll for it. Sylvanas took out 10 dice and tossed them, obtaining a sum of 22. Wah, Sister Vannas, your luck's bad. Peasant smiled and took the dice, then tossed them out and obtained a sum of 10. You're no better. Not Wearing Pants laughed and tossed the dice, which soon indicated 11. That's hilarious. I think it's mine. Burning Chest Hair's dice showed 12. What the heck? Arthur took the dice and tossed them. He obtained 56. Wah, Arthur's luck is very good. Is all of your luck used up? Arthur bro, give it to me, please. Give it to me. Arthur bro's awesome. Arthur took the mana skills book and said, I'm selling it for magic stones. Sorry, peasant. All of them were dumbstruck. Peasant managed to reply after some time, saying, it's all right. I'll go back first. We'll gather at Spectre College tonight. I'm leaving. Arthur put away the mana skills book. After, he didn't participate in the allocation of the rest of the loot and left the instance dungeon. The 4 of them looked at each other, and Sylvanas shouted, it's not normal. Arthur left the Ogre Fortress and ran back to Eternal Kingdom's outpost, then returned to Eternal Kingdom via the teleport portal. Along the way, he only greeted familiar faces. Outside the teleport portal main hall, along the road, some gamers were trying to erect lampposts. That was the new infrastructure in the dungeon. One gamer pushed a cart filled with soil and rocks, another gamer carried a pile of cloth and ran over, and yet another gamer sat on the ground and put a bowl in front. Please pity me. I played for 2 months and became bankrupt. Please spare some change. I'm dying of hunger. Eternal Kingdom was looking prosperous, and all passers-by had green symbols above their heads. After all, the few NPCs stayed at specific locations while working and normally wouldn't wander around. Arthur didn't stop, walking towards the flower bed. Arthur wasn't aware that 2 orcs followed him stealthily. They were wearing normal equipment. They were Sylvanas and not wearing pants. Indeed, Arthur bro isn't normal. Sylvanas squinted her eyes. I killed myself to return back and lay in ambush. That was the correct decision. Wah, I didn't expect you to be so awesome. You can tell with your intuition? Not wearing pants expression was like 6,666. Why did you follow me back to Eternal Kingdom? You're hindering me. Sylvanas looked in disdain at not wearing pants and said, don't tell Arthur. I know you're good with him, but don't hinder me. Wah, how can you say that? Is there a private chat in the game? Not Wearing Pants replied immediately, I'm curious why Arthur wanted that mana skills book. I don't think he uses mana skills. That is his belief, and he wanted to sell it for magic stone? My god, can't he tell a proper lie? Arthur walked into the seedbed that was filled with gamers. Quick, follow him. Not Wearing Pants quickly followed Arthur. Sylvanas felt angry as she followed behind Not Wearing Pants. Chapter 394. Winterfell is in danger. The flower bed was full of gamers who were attending the potion and cultivation class. After the little fairy made an agreement with Sherlock because of Raintia, the flower bed had become the little fairy's classroom. Though Sherlock's flower bed was big enough, after the number of gamers increased to 5,000, it looked a bit small. There were various plants cultivated in the flower bed, and in the middle of the flower bed was a huge tree with a thick trunk that would require 4 orcs to hug its diameter. Everyone knew that the tree was grown by Raintia, though nobody knew why the tree grew so fast and so large. Even the little fairy, who was reluctant to shift her bed, shifted her bed to the treehouse that she constructed in the tree. The little fairy was teaching the gamers basic cultivation. Even though Arthur was far away, he could hear the little fairy shouting. "Huh? Did I teach you to grow such things? Mana, use your mana, fools. Without mana, plants are unable to grow in the underworld." The little fairy was used to being with the gamers and had changed from the initial fear to her current relaxed manner. The only thing that hadn't changed was her saliva spitting habit. Pooey. When a gamer was about to touch her, the little fairy spat at the gamer's head and sent him flying. It wasn't known whether he survived. Such a troublesome gamer was rare. At such proximity, a gamer would die if not maimed after being spat on by the little fairy. Arthur wasn't there for the class. He merely observed the students in the class and then left, going to find his target. His target was Raintia, who was in the flower bed taking care of a sharp-clawed sunflower. After finding her, Arthur walked towards Raintia. Behind Arthur, not wearing pants and Sylvanas pushed aside the creature-eating flower, which provided cover for them. Sylvanas bit her collar and said viciously, "It's indeed Raintia. I knew that Raintia was up to no good. She's competing with me for Arthur bro. Previously, the rumors were rife, and you consoled me, saying that there was nothing between Arthur and Raintia." I didn't console you. I've been saying that Arthur and Raintia are a perfect match." Not wearing pants looked bewildered at Sylvanas, who took out a dagger to cut his throat. Arthur turned his head, and both of them ducked. Arthur looked left and right behind his back. Besides the gamers who were attending the class and the wavering creature eating flower, there was nothing unusual. Some gamers noticed Arthur and came over to greet him since he was the top gamer. Arthur replied politely and then walked beside Raintia. Raintia," Arthur said without emotion. Raintia, who was humming a tune and taking care of the plants, lifted her head, smiling widely when she saw Arthur. "Arthur, what's the matter? Are you buying minor healing potions?" "Apologies, there are many gamers buying recently. Tell me how many you need, and I'll send them to you after I finish making them." Raintia knelt on the ground and placed her hands on her knees. The picture looked like a male orc standing beside a young female goblin with a sunny disposition. "It's frustrating. Why is that goblin so pretty? That wily gamer. Why did she make such a beautiful face? Who is she seducing?" Sylvanas bit her collar into pieces with her sharp orc fangs. Have you played too much Mount and Blade? You can't be a vulnerable girl. A Mount and Blade gamer can't possibly be a vulnerable girl." Sylvanas decided to charge out, but not wearing pants pulled her back and said, "Hey, what are you doing? If you charge out now, won't Arthur know that we followed him? He'll end our friendship." Upon hearing not wearing pants' reminder, Sylvanas immediately went into hiding, continuing to chew on her collar. Arthur turned his head back. He felt as though he was being watched. "Arthur? It's nothing." Arthur turned back to look at Raintia, then took out a mana skills book and said, "I'll order 100 potions. Don't hurry. Complete the other orders first. This is the reward." "Wait, Arthur bro, a mana skills book is very expensive. The price of a minor healing potion isn't as high as before. Instead of exchanging the mana skills book for minor healing potions, isn't it better to learn from the mana skills book? Or sell it for magic stones?" Raintia said quickly. "Did the price drop? Then I'll exchange this for the equivalent amount of potions. I saw on the discussion forum that there is a mana skill that can simulate sunlight, which will improve the growth rate of the plants. You can learn the mana skill using this book and produce more magic potions. The guilds are developing, and we need a lot of magic potions, so if you increase your productivity, it'll be beneficial for our guilds." Arthur said firmly, "I'm investing in you as a guild chairman, so don't feel bad about it." "I see, I understand. I'll prepare myself." Raintia accepted Arthur's mana skills book and bowed to show her gratitude. Arthur didn't stay. He turned and left. Not wearing pants said to Sylvanas, "What did I say? I told you that there's nothing between them. Arthur is here to make an order." Most of our minor healing potions are ordered from Raintia. I feel that it's not that simple. No, I'll ask Dragonborn what happened at the hospital that night. Arthur and Raintia must be together. Then Arthur gave Dragonborn 100 magic stones to change factions. It must be like that. Sylvanas stamped her foot angrily, but not wearing pants said, "Wah, don't you know the character of Arthur? He said he didn't make Dragonborn change factions. He didn't lie to us, and he said he didn't want to talk about that night again. If you ask Dragonborn and Arthur learns about it, you won't have a chance." Not wearing pants tried to persuade Sylvanas and then went into deep thought. After a moment, he muttered to himself, "Why'd I care about your love life? Forget it, I'm washing my hands of this. I haven't completed many of my daily missions. Do what you like, I'm leaving." Not wearing pants left the flower bed, while Sylvanas stood there and pondered hard. On the streets of Winterfell, the underworld inhabitants who were going to work queued up at the Beetleman stand as usual. The only thing unusual was that there was a special creature in the queue. He was Lord Sherlock, the Dungeon Lord of Eternal Kingdom, who had saved Winterfell twice and defeated Morgan's ogre army. He was famous throughout the northern underworld. Why was Lord Sherlock using public transport? Should he not have a private beetleman for his transportation needs? He was friendly with the residents. Though he looked friendly, nobody dared to talk to this superior devil. He was a superior devil. Bruce spoke non-stop in Sherlock's mind, saying, Lord Sherlock, we can't continue like this. You must have the demeanor of a celebrity. Don't we have a lot of beetlemans in the dungeon? We have an office in the old district, and we can improvise a beetleman for your private use. We can arrange for a personal beetleman to wait for you at the teleport portal main hall. That will look impressive. Sherlock nodded his head and said, considering the costs, if I let a single beetleman service me, it will be against my thriftiness. After all, a beetleman can send 200 gamers to the factory for work, and a gamer who works for 10 days can earn 1 magic stone. So, 200 gamers will earn 200 magic stones. It's better than letting me use the beetleman. Brew was silent for a while before he said, you are right, Lord Sherlock. A beetleman came over. It wasn't a public beetleman. The beetleman stopped in front of Sherlock. A gnome dismounted from the driver's seat and said politely to Sherlock, Lord Sherlock, so you're here. Dungeon Lord Nicholas is looking for you. Please follow me. Sherlock looked at the gnome, bewildered, but he boarded the beetleman nonetheless. Pa-ta, pa-ta, pa-ta. The beetleman quickened its pace. What happened? It looks urgent, Sherlock asked as he settled in at the seat behind. Someone is plotting against Winterfell, Lord Sherlock. The gnome wiped the sweat off his forehead. He looked very worried. Chapter 395 I Have a Friend. Commercial crisis? Sherlock sat opposite Nicholas, his hand on his knees as he frowned and repeated what Nicholas had said. Yes, Lord Sherlock, we encountered the first commercial crisis. Nicholas crossed his arms on the table. His brows were tightly knit, and he looked haggard, as though he hadn't slept for many days. He wasn't even interested in the cup of bloody chrysanthemum tea placed before him. That was abnormal. Nobody could possibly dislike bloody chrysanthemum tea, with the exception of Lilo. Sherlock had the impression that the fallen angel preferred green tea. Beast preferred drowsy red tea? No, he wasn't a creature. I didn't believe that taking over Winterfell would be a simple affair, but I didn't expect it to be this complicated. Nicholas took out a document from his drawer, then passed the document to Sherlock. Sherlock found many photographs, one of which depicted a dead creature. He looked grotesque and was covered with mosaic. Following the photographs was a report filled with words. Robbing incident of the Black Volcano Merchant Band. Respectable Winterfell Dungeon Lord Onionhead. We are sorry to inform you that the merchant band under you has been attacked at Black Volcano. Their goods vanished. We found a sole survivor, but he died soon after. There were no other survivors. We suspect that they were poisoned by the gas emitted from the lava. As the Black Volcano is an active one, eruptions are more frequent. We are short of resources. For safety's sake, we hope that Winterfell can send a dedicated investigation team. As you know, the goods are important to Winterfell and the Merchant Alliance. They are very sensitive items. The subsequent contents were about the on-site investigation, the identities of the dead, and their numbers. Sherlock was surprised by their identities and numbers. There were 2,500 merchant band guards? The report says that there are no survivors. That's right, they were annihilated, and no traces of their corpses were discovered. Nicholas said gravely, besides paying a large sum for death compensation, we have to answer to the labor union, though they are easy to manage since the Merchant Alliance has a standard set of procedures. The only headache is the lost materials. I understand your predicament. But why are you concerned about it? Isn't Dungeon Lord Onionhead the one who sent out the merchant band? Though he's now the region judge, shouldn't he be responsible? Sherlock put down the documents, and Nicholas nodded as he said, under normal circumstances, that's the case, but this isn't part of the Merchant Alliance's internal affairs. This is a commerce activity between the Merchant Alliance and the Northern Dukedom. The item was a dungeon core that was entrusted to us for transport. If the item was lost, Judge Onionhead has to be responsible. But as the Winterfell Dungeon Lord, I can't wash my hands of it. If I do, my enemies will use this reason to remove me. Oh, it sounds tricky. Wait, I remember that the Black Volcano is the Northern Underworld's most famous tourist attraction. Isn't the trade route safe? Sherlock sipped his bloody chrysanthemum tea and leaned back in the chair. His eyes were observing the picture in front of him. Yes, from Winterfell to the Northern Dukedom, the safest route is via the Black Volcano. Though it's a safer detour, the shipment was still attacked. Nicholas looked as though he was in pain as he said, there were 2,500 of them. Yet, less than 10 of them were discovered. They were dying and perished soon after. As for the remaining guards, their corpses weren't found. It's so frustrating. The death compensation is, I understand. What does Dungeon Lord Nicholas want of me? I understand that you require resources for the search and rescue of the missing goods. As you know, Eternal Kingdom has just gone through a major war, and the citizens are exhausted and tired of fighting. They prefer peace. If given a choice, they won't kill an ant. As for their armor and weapons, they would like to smelt them into liquid metal. However, reality doesn't allow that. Though the underworld looks peaceful, it's not so. Sherlock looked depressed, and Nicholas said sadly, Lord Sherlock, your citizens have gone through hardships. I won't ask too much of you. The successor to the Northern Dukedom, the son of the Duke, Lord Alexandria, came to visit Winterfell and expressed his respect for you in front of Judge Onionhead. If you represent Winterfell and request Alexandria to persuade his father not to complain against us to the Devil Management Committee, then we'll have more time to investigate what happened and locate the item. It will be most helpful. You won't work in vain either, I'll ask the higher management. Wait, Sherlock interrupted Nicholas. He pondered for a while and asked, don't you intend to let Winterfell investigate this matter? Of course not. After the entire merchant band vanished, the tourists also disappeared, and the wild beasts became easily agitated. The Devil Management Committee has sealed off the Black Volcano. Normal creatures are unable to enter because the area is dangerous. Nicholas said, we contacted various mercenary groups that provide protection, escorting, and investigation. We intend to hire a mercenary group to handle the investigation. Mercenary group? What's the remuneration? If you don't mind. Sherlock raised his hand and said, Dungeon Lord Nicholas, don't be mistaken, I'm not thinking of earning remuneration. Because of our close relationship, I have to know about it. Lord Sherlock, I'm very touched. Nicholas was full of tears. He said quickly, as this matter is special and urgent, even if we're making losses, we intend to pay 10 million magic stones as remuneration. I'll take it. I'll accept for my friend. Sherlock explained, I have a friend called Polio. The name is the same as the escaped prisoner from Bancasia. Don't be mistaken, it's only a name. He has a mercenary group with an excellent track record and good investigation capability. Believe me, if you give him this task, it will be solved quickly. We'll find out why the dungeon core was destroyed. Destroyed? Lord Sherlock, we don't know if the dungeon core was destroyed. It's hard to destroy a dungeon core. Nicholas was shocked and quickly explained, but Sherlock spread out his hands and said, I know. We'll prepare for the worst. The enemy was prepared and had a specific goal, the dungeon core. It's most likely an enemy of the Northern Dukedom, Winterfell, or the Merchant Alliance. The situation being what it is, they can't possibly retain the dungeon core to celebrate their new year. Most likely, they'll destroy it. That's possible. They can use it to upgrade another dungeon core. We only need to obtain their dungeon core and cover our losses. If it was committed by another dungeon, Such a crime will not go unpunished. Of course, I'm only speculating. Nicholas was relieved. It was good if the enemy didn't destroy the dungeon core. As the matter was grave, if the selected mercenary group wasn't qualified, then. Yes, in regards to the capability of Polio and his mercenary group, I can vouch for them with Eternal Kingdom and my personal guarantee. Don't worry, Sherlock said and patted his chest when he noticed that Nicholas was hesitating. Nicholas said, I understand. I'll impose on you, Lord Sherlock. Please let your friend and his mercenary group come to Winterfell for the mission briefing. Our intelligence unit will provide them with assistance. No problem. I'll bring them over within the next few days, Sherlock said happily. Chapter 396, The Sins of Online Games. A large erupting volcano with thick black mist was drawn on a poster. In the middle of the poster were two laughing orcs. The bottom of the poster had the words, Experience the active black volcano. The last experience of your life, written on it. There was a line of fine print below that. Are you feeling hopeless? Do you feel that life is hard? Are you feeling anxious about your current situation? Come to this famous tourist attraction. The active black volcano has the answers that you want. Below the fine print was some very fine print. Death rate is as high as 90%. Our agency isn't responsible for any deaths. Isn't the black volcano the safest tour route? Brainiac pondered over the poster and asked Sherlock. As it's in the active stage, it will spurt out lava. The more frightening aspect is the poisonous gas that's emitted. Any normal race that gets near the gas will die. The active stage just started recently. When the Winterfell merchant band traveled via the black volcano, it was in a dormant stage, so it wasn't that dangerous. Sherlock sat in a chair in the Dungeon Lord main hall. In front of him were Brainiac, Eggface, Evelyn, Yoda, and Polio, who was in the kitten form. This is the information on the black volcano. I spent a lot of money to gather information. Take a look. In the coming future, we'll survey the area. It's important to know more about the location. Sherlock passed the posters to everyone. Besides Eggface and Evelyn, who were studying the poster seriously, Brainiac and Yoda were befuddled. Polio said, Meow, what a joke, meow. How can such a poster cost a lot of money? Anyone can get them from the tour agency entrance. Polio was going to use his claws to shred the poster and throw it to the ground, but after seeing Sherlock, he nodded and said firmly, I see. There's a death rate of 90%, meow. That's very dangerous, meow. Are there fewer tourists during the active stage of the volcano? This makes it more convenient for us to deploy and investigate, meow, meow. Yes, Yoda will fly the airship near the black volcano. I have signed up for a free tour at the Winterfell tour agency, so a tour guide will follow the airship to the black volcano tourist spot. Polio will be the mercenary captain. Remember to disguise yourself as a knight mercenary captain and create a mercenary's resume and name. Brainiac will be the highly paid consultant of the mercenary group. Tomorrow, we'll pay a visit to Lassie. I thought it over for a long time and gritted my teeth before I loaned you out to the mercenary group. Sherlock said, Eggface, once the airship arrives at the location, you'll visit the black volcano. You'll be the logistics officer at the black volcano. You're responsible for exchange the equipment and goods of the citizens and supervising the construction of the outpost. Evelyn, you'll produce the promotional posters and place them at the Adventurers Guild. The citizens have to spend game currency to participate in this special black volcano mission. After completion of the mission, they can obtain adventurers' reputation points and upgrade their adventurers' medals. I'm sure you are familiar with these gimmicks. We don't have to motivate them, and I'm not worried about that. It's all about rituals, poetic feelings, and a sense of purpose. Within 3 days, the promotional materials have to be completed. If you can't cope, you may use the adventurers' missions to obtain the help of the citizens. They are actually quite talented in publicity matters. Can I use the computer? No. If I don't bring along my computer, won't I be unable to perform my customer service duty? No, your intention is to play computer games. We can stop the customer service for a period of time. I'll announce your sick leave. I'm the commander-in-chief of the Azeroth faction, the field marshal of Red Alert, the civilization tutor of Age of Empires, friend of Peace Society, king of assassins. No, Sherlock interrupted Eggface's wild imagination, and the meeting ended. Brainiac was the only one who stayed in the office. Brainiac was going to discuss something with Sherlock. Lord Sherlock, I feel that it's better not to get involved in this matter. Brainiac stood in front of Sherlock, looking very solemn. Are you worried about the dangers? Sherlock asked. No, I read in the newspaper that the missing merchant band was sending goods to the northern dukedom. Lord Alexandria seems to be plotting against Lord Sherlock. During the Winterfell invasion of the ancient god's army, Alexandria suggested putting Eternal Fire and Eternal Kingdom together at the front line, Brainiac said respectfully. Sherlock nodded and said, You're right, Brainiac. But, Sherlock stood up and walked to the window. He looked gently at the rowdy gamers and said, Sometimes, even if it's difficult and dangerous, we may have reasons not to back off. Though I'm unable to tell you the details, you'll understand why I'm doing this one day. This is youth, Brainiac. There are many things that you have to learn. Leave now and do your work. Tomorrow, we'll visit Dungeon Lord Lassie. I understand, Lord Sherlock. Brainiac bowed to Sherlock and left the Dungeon Lord main hall, then stood at the Dungeon Lord main hall entrance and stared out in a daze. Youth, a new challenge was awaiting Eternal Kingdom. To the gamers, it was another content update. However, the gamers had more important things on their minds than content updates. For online games, the actual gameplay wasn't the first priority, social interaction was. In social interactions, besides positive elements such as youth, aspirations, friendship, and love, there were darker elements such as slanderous rumors. In Eternal Kingdom, strange rumors were rife. Raintia is a green TB*TCH who acts innocent but is swindling Arthur's equipment. Life connoisseur gamer? Never involved in a fight? Someone who set up a fake image has to take a rest. Dragonborn was forced to change factions by Raintia? Raintia is trying to break up the Pioneer Alliance. Everyone knows that Arthur and Sylvanas are on good terms, but she is intruding as a third party. Shameless. Raintia is already married in real life. She isn't a vulnerable girl. She is a married mom. Why is she called Raintia? Calling her green tea would be better. If the Pioneer Alliance has a gamer like Raintia, it will break up sooner or later. Chase Raintia out. We don't want to see the Pioneer Alliance break up. The posts were attacking Raintia. Whenever posts mentioned Arthur, they were either compliments or putting him as a victim. For the past 2 days, the discussion forum was heating up. Many gamers were eager to watch the conflict that was about to unfold. The guild members of the Pioneer Alliance weren't bothered. They would file a complaint and wait for the administrator to remove the rumor posts and ban the slanderers. However, since the discussion forum was open to the internet, band members were allowed to register new accounts. They continued to spread rumors and heat up the discussion forum. The number of rumormongers was large, and they would create controversial posts and replies in other posts, all of them attacking Raintia. They made Raintia look like an evil and plotting green TB*TCH. Many gamers retaliated since they were familiar with Raintia, but many more gamers didn't know Raintia and were just enjoying the show. Slowly, they mistook the rumors as truth and started spreading false information. Humans were born with an evil nature. This evil would show itself with mass propagation and peer pressure. Examples of evil deeds were plentiful. Raintia tried to defend herself, but she couldn't take it anymore and created a post. I only want to be a peaceful gamer. I don't wish to be embroiled in any conflict. She spoke of how she was just a dormant member of the Pioneer Alliance. Arthur and Raintia were just normal friends, and they had never formed a team before. In fact, they rarely spoke to each other. Raintia didn't have the intention to be a third party, nor did she know why Dragonborn switched factions. She even felt sad about it, never having the intention to hurt Dragonborn and force him to switch over to Victoria City. Though Raintia's post was detailed, the replies were sarcastic. Some of them were rebuking her, while some gamers twisted the facts and scolded her. Most of the gamers just watched the show eagerly. There were some who spoke up for Raintia, and they started conflicts in the posts. Before long, a notice appeared before all Pioneer Alliance members. Raintia has left the Pioneer Alliance. Arthur went to look for Raintia, but she avoided him. When she saw Arthur coming, she immediately went offline. A large crack soon appeared in the Pioneer Alliance. The subsequent events were totally unexpected.